Let's do it.
All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the New Breed Podcast. Not the world's first, not the world's best, but one of the best. I will give it that much. Podcast concentrating solely on the topic of new metal. I am your, or I should say, one half of your hosting duo, Jay Horsecow. With me, I have the notorious TIM, Tim Anderson Jr. Tim,
What's up?
welcome.
What's going on?
And our special guest, celebrity guest tonight, to talk about our topic, we have the A&R man extraordinaire, man of many hats, many talents, Mr. Howie Abrams. Howie, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. I love the topic we're going to discuss. I have many fond thoughts and memories, so I'm down.
Fantastic. And I love it when the guests give the segue away because it makes my life easier. So the topic of this episode, we are going to be talking about Roadrunner Records. So unless you are under the age of, say, 12 or have been living under a rock for the past 20 years, you at one point in time have encountered some sort of Roadrunner band. They have a long and storied history, especially if you're in the world of extreme metal, hardcore, new metal, obviously why we have Howie here. They have released some seminal records. I mean, you can't trip and fall from, I'd say, right around 92 till probably right about now without finding at least one or two great albums that they've put out. And Howie, I'm going to back up for a second in case our listeners, because it's a different audience, in case our listeners don't really know who you are. Do you want to take a second and just give us a little bit of history about you yourself?
Yeah, I mean, of late I've been writing books, all music-related stuff, all heavy music-related stuff. But I started out in the music business, working at record labels and music publishing companies. And my first gig was actually at a distribution company called Important, which was the biggest independent distributor in the country. And they had a bunch of sister companies that were record labels. So they had Combat Records, which a lot of people know. It was very heavy, sort of on the death metal stuff and the thrash metal stuff, Dark Angel, Death, things like that. And then I started a label, sort of cousin to Combat, called In Effect Records, which was more of a hardcore thing. Agnostic Front, Sick of It All, Killing Time, Madball, Nuclear Assault, various 24/7 Spies, Scatterbrain, lots of bands. And from there, I was there for almost 6 years and wound up working at Roadrunner Records. And then a couple other things after that. And then, like I said, I've been working on books lately, but a lot of my history, all of my history is working with music, but a lot of it is in the, on the record company side.
And so I guess I know we vaguely got into a little bit of this on the last episode we did on Ill Street, but like what persuaded you to go from doing the label and then jumping into the A&R side? Because I always found that to be like, I mean, I guess it's kind of the same, but kind of not. Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, I was talking to Hoya about this when I did his podcast with him. And, when I was at In Effect, I didn't know what A&R was. Like, I didn't know what people's titles were at record companies at all. I was just sort of like following in the footsteps of other independent record labels that I liked, whether it was Discord or Revelation or, whatever it was, Epitaph. And just like, hey, they find cool bands. They make records with them. They put out the records. They promote the records. The bands go on tour, all this stuff. So I wasn't that well-versed in what the hell I was doing other than what the day-to-day tasks were, but I didn't know the title, So when that was all over, I was able to look back and go, okay, I guess, that's what I was doing. I was doing A&R, I was doing product management, I was doing marketing and like all of this stuff. And then when I got asked to do an A&R gig at Roadrunner, what it was that they wanted me to bring bands to them the way I'd been bringing them in Effect. So even though it was for something that I was more directly involved with at first, now I was just going to go do it with a company that, to be honest, had, a pretty nice established, format as far as promoting and marketing. And also what they had, which was huge, was they had this incredible international setup. So what they had in New York, they also had in Holland, in Germany, in England, in Belgium, a couple of people, Brazil, because of Sepultura alone, there were people in Brazil, Japan. So you had this opportunity to put these bands out in all of these territories. And, once I was there for a while, I realized how powerful that really was.
And I mean, that is one of the things that sticks out with me with Roadrunner when you look at the old Dynamo lineups, right? 94, 95, there's a ton of Roadrunner bands. And when you think about it, you're like, how did like Machine Head, or at that point, Burn 95, I think was their big year, the 94, their album 95. Came out, 94 it came out, Burn My Eyes comes out. I was really surprised to see them on that lineup and go, wait a minute, they're not huge here in the States, and yet they're playing how many thousands of people show open air.
So check this out, right? All of the 1994 albums, the bands released these great albums in 94. Every one of those bands on Roadrunner played the 95 Dynamo.
Oh, and wow.
If people don't know what Dynamo is, it's this massive festival in Eindhoven, Holland. It's been going on for years. But it started out as 3,000-4,000 people and a couple of thrash metal bands, from Germany, maybe one from America, a couple from the UK. And then, so that year, 95, was 120,000 people. And the headliners for the 2 days were Typo Negative and Paradise Lost, right?
Man.
So you're like 120,000 people for those two bands. But what it really was, it was the entire lineup for the 2 days. And so much of it was Roadrunner, and so much of it was Roadrunner with bands who put out albums in 94, the year before. So this is the summer of 95. And Europe just took aggressive music way more seriously than they did in America. It wasn't like this little bastard child the way it is here, because the music business in America is the radio game and videos, and it's a much more commercial thing. Whereas there, the niche stuff was taken seriously. And let's say you look at something like England, just the UK alone, right? You had weekly music press, right? So you had Kerrang, which went from weekly to bi-weekly, fortnightly. And then, as they would say, and then, so you had that. And then you had the NME and those papers, and you had BBC radio. So you had national radio. So conquering the UK could happen kind of quickly, whereas that would be like conquering Philly or conquering New York, right? And not the entire country here, which European bands found out very quickly when they came here to tour. Like, holy shit, does it take a long time to get from the East Coast to the West Coast? Huge place. But there you could play like a dozen shows just in the UK, and, no crazy drives, everything would be an hour or two. And so it was just a whole different thing. Germany's huge, but the same thing where every city had its own thing, so you could do Berlin, and you could do Cologne, and you could do Essen, and you could do Stuttgart, and you could play all these places, and they were like their own little planets. But they all found out about it because you could just sort of go at Germany, right? So even that Dynamo, it's right on the border with Germany, right? So of those 120,000 people, I'm sure 75,000 of them were from Germany, because you saw on the highway, the cars were coming from both directions, and there was a much bigger traffic jam, on the side coming from Germany.
So Howie, what year did you start at Roadrunner?
I started in 92.
Okay, so that was basically
time at landed, and then right there.
So you landed right before when I think of the first big wave of Roadrunner, I think of 93, 94, 95, right? That's where they basically went nuts.
It feels like that's when, I think it coincided with my hiring. Not saying I'm responsible for it. I'm saying that was the time when I think they decided they wanted to try to do some different things, but also do some things and concentrate in a certain way. So they got a little bit more serious about their radio department. They started to make a few more videos. Things like that started to happen. So if you notice, from 93 on, every band's got a video, right? Whereas before that, maybe Sepultura got videos. And, I don't even know, I don't even remember there being obituary videos before that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Before sort of that, maybe Don't Care, right? Was the first one that I remember. I don't remember them having a video before that. Deicide didn't have videos. So Deicide, Sepultura, and Obituary were the three biggest bands, you know, and like Type O wasn't quite the factor that they became yet, you know. That was the following year, really, actually, and the year after. But you know, they weren't making videos. But yeah, things like they really started to happen there in a different way about 93.
And when I when I think of 93, right, the 3 or 4 albums that bookend to me is like, here is the wave starting. It's Arise, Sepultura's Arise. It's Type O Negative's Bloody Kisses. A couple of videos for that one, right? Would they have gotten as big as they would have without MTV?
No, Black Number One and Christian Woman were huge.
Yep. And again, you know, Peter Steele, you know, rest in peace, God rest his soul. His voice was so unique; it matched the music perfectly. So your ear couldn't help but pick it out.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's like, you know, I worked on both of those records for, you know, because I was, aside from doing A&R, I came in and I started doing product management for a bit. So they had me work on some of the bands I think that they expected to do sort of big things, right? So Sepultura was their biggest band at the time. There was like a second wave of promotion on the Arise album where they went out on tour with Ozzy. And that's when the Black Sabbath reunion happened. So they played at Irvine Meadows out in California. I was the product manager, so I was there. And so I heard in advance, oh shit, Black Sabbath's going to play, you know? And so, so I was out there for that, but that was a huge tour for them. That was like, it was an arena tour, you know, for all intents and purposes for fucking Sepultura, you know? And then after that, you know, and then they get the Ministry Helmet tour.
Which is a lineup that I can't believe. Like, I can't even wrap my head around the 3 of those bands on the same stage.
I probably saw like
at that point.
I think I saw about 6 shows of that tour, and like it was amazing every night. And you know, there were Sepultura fans there, you know, and so that was still the thing where you were like, okay, it's Ministry, you know, they have a little bit of a metal audience, but really for the most part, you know, they kind of have like that sort of darker
industrial grunge, industrial, you know, like gothic.
It was somewhere between like the Skinny Puppy thing and 9 Inch Nails, like. They have the real shit and then the very commercial shit. And then you had Helmet, you know, who, you know, nobody knew who the fuck they were outside of New York, except once they got on MTV, you know? And so basically then there's Sepultura, like big underground, you know, for all intents and purposes, death metal band. And, you know, they did really well on that tour. But then when they were making Bloody Kisses, Type O, they let me work on that too. So I wrote the marketing plan for that record. And, you know, I worked on a lot of aspects of the first, you know, year of that album. And, you know, I helped them make the videos. So we hired, you know, Paris Mayhew to do Black Number One, you know, Paris from the Cro-Mags and who he and Pete knew each other quite well. And so, you know, things like that. And then, it was so interesting to see all of this stuff starting to grow. So even the things that Roadrunner already had were taking these kind of leaps, you know, forward. So, you know, Pete through Carnivore and the first earlier Type O records, like he'd been on that label for quite a while, you know, and Sepultura had been on the label for quite a while. And, you know, they were sort of becoming like that next Slayer, you know, for a while there. Like after Slayer, they were the band, you know, and, you know, helping, not only watching it, but helping that along was amazing. But it was, and then more stuff kept coming and coming. So like, again, a lot of stuff signed in 93, put out the records in 94, blew up between 94 and 95. So it was kind of an interesting 3 years there.
So to that point, Howie, right? So 93 has Arise, it has Bloody Kisses, it has, I believe, River Runs Red, Life of Agony was 93.
93.
And then you have 94, which is Machine Head's Burn My Eyes, Madball Set It Off. You have the Nail Bomb LP. And then you have 95, it's Demanufacture, right? Fear
Factor. But here's the thing, going back to international, right? So Dog Eat Dog put out an EP in 93. The album came out in 94. And by 95, they were bigger than everybody overseas, but not here. So
that's crazy.
That's the isms. It really is. That's the thing I mean about the international thing, because like I went over to Europe at one point it may have been that Dynamo trip or it may have been before it, but I went over there and I was with those guys and we're in the airport in Europe somewhere and they go to like McDonald's and the fucking kids who work at McDonald's are throwing free food at them. Like because they're the guys in Dog Eat Dog, you know? And then they'd get home to New Jersey.
They can't get a parking ticket.
And like, you know, like they can't get a taxi home. You know what I mean? It's like, it was insane, you know? So, you know, Black Train Jack, right? So that was a 93. I think the first album may have even come out in 93 actually. But over there were kids that like, the way that they cared about them was a different level than here, you know, where it felt like nobody west of maybe Chicago knew who that band was, you know, and where you could go to Holland and see kids wearing Black Train Jack shirts at Dynamo.
So let me ask you that hat question, Howie, is a little bit of an aside, right? Why do you think that there are some bands that just get absolutely massive over in Europe, across the pond, and here they don't really resonate or stick around? Is it because they're more, is like you were talking about earlier, how the European countries view extreme music as honestly a little bit more cosmopolitan? It's not as far off the mean.
You know what? There's a few reasons, and I'm still sort of learning like the ins and outs of why I think that is. But there's a couple of things. And one thing that I thought was really, really interesting was in doing Pete and Lou's book, we talked to Mark Nickel, who runs a company over in Germany called MAD, and they're a booking agent. They're the ones that bring over all the American hardcore bands and some of the punk bands and all that. And I was talking to him about like, why did Sick of It All get so fucking big over there? You know, I was trying to like understand, like, I understand the popularity. Sure, if you play festivals that range from 15 to 80,000 people every single summer, you're going to get more popular. I get it, you know, but like they've been this popular since they first started going over there in like 91, you know, and they've always been this big. And he said, well, he goes, I could tell you about their case and why I think the East Coast bands, generally speaking, have done so well in Europe. And he said, I think Germany specifically, and which is the biggest market, and it feeds out to like a lot of the rest of Europe, they relate to the East Coast artists more than they do to the West Coast artists, because they see them as like these more urban minded people, and they feel that they're just like them. And that in California, they felt it was difficult to relate to the sort of sunny Southern California lifestyle. And they felt like the Northern California stuff was very student, you know? So like that the Northern California stuff was a little too over intellectual, Dead Kennedys, you know, things like that. It was like almost like you felt like they were almost talking down to you a little bit, like you're an idiot if you don't believe this. And that in Southern California was very, you know, like, oh, I'm skating and I'm going to meet girls, you know, at the Shake Shack, and I'm going to, you know, ride my fucking bike on the beach. And they just didn't get it. You know, they didn't understand that, but they understood. And I'm not talking about thug shit. I'm talking about just like city stuff, you know, and urban stuff, and what you go through living in more of a concrete jungle kind of environment, which was similar to theirs, right? So already their ability to relate to bands like the ones that we were putting out, it was right there, right? So as much fantasy as Biohazard had, right? Like, you know, the kids over there related to it almost the way they related to hip hop, you know, that like it almost had this like street thing that you don't know if it's real or not, like with these guys, but it doesn't matter, you know. And then they would come see them and they put on this great show, and, you know, they would say hello to everybody and go to the merch booth and shake hands and kiss babies and do all that shit. Excuse me. So they related more, it seems like, to our bands, let's say, that they did to the California stuff. So there's that. Then there's the treating aggressive music like it's more as a more serious thing. They also over there don't tend to break everything up into subgenres the way that we do, which is
so annoying.
So you don't have to like a certain kind of metal, a certain kind of hardcore. It doesn't matter. Like, it's all the same. Like, you can like fucking, Dag Nasty, and you can like Hatebreed, and you can like Madball, and you could like some other melodic band, and it doesn't fucking matter. And even that Dynamo, like the variety and of styles and stuff, they were all there on the bill. Like, the thing is, like, for instance, we mentioned Doggy Dog. It's like they were the lightest band on the bill by a long shot. So before they went on, and they'd been building up, like they were getting bigger and bigger by the minute at that point. And I'm like, man, I don't know how they're going to go over. Like, they're playing between like Machine Head and Biohazard, with Dynamo. And like, there's people out there, like these Germans with these fucking battle jackets on with like Saxon and fucking, every new wave of British heavy metal band on the back of their jacket. How's this going to go? And they killed, and the place went berserk. And I honestly was curious how that was going to go. Like, when you looked at the crowd and you looked at them, you were like, this may suck. Like, I don't know how this is if this is going to go down well. And, it was 80 of the 120,000 people pogoing for 45 minutes. It was insane.
It's completely
because you're expecting beers to be thrown on stage.
Yeah.
I was worried about that a little bit. That's what I mean. I was like, I've seen like over my teenage years, the photos of like even Metallica got shit thrown at them, like at Donington, in England and stuff like that. Just because they were new, because they weren't, Judas Priest or Iron Maiden, and that's what most of those fans were used to when they played there the first time, in '86 or whatever it was. And it was like, so you're just wondering how it would go. And it was just amazing. And no band got a bad reaction. I mean, some got much better than others, but nobody had any issues with the crowd, and with 120,000 people out there, I was like, how can people not have any problems with the crowd?
Yeah. That's kind of weird when you think about it. I mean, just the size alone of people sitting at a show seeing like Typo Negative, right? Or Machine Head, right? Like, it's kind of surreal.
In the mud, in the rain, they camped out for 3 days. You know what I mean? They're all fucking high as a kite. So, maybe it's the drugs too, is maybe that everybody was so high that like,
it's interesting.
They're too stoned to fight. They're too stoned to throw anything.
So let me ask you this, Howie, as the man on the inside, was there a moment where even inside the halls of Roadrunner Records, everybody was looking around going, man, I think we're onto something. Like, this is quickly taking on a life of its own.
Well, I don't know if anybody looked at it as like a collective, per se. We just noticed that a number of the bands were starting to, to go places that maybe we didn't expect, or, they were achieving things that we thought that they should, It wasn't until you go to like a 95 Dynamo when you're like, holy shit, look at all these Roadrunner bands. Like, they're all on our label, like the winners of this festival are all on Roadrunner. And then you go backstage and there's like, it's like when you go to This Is Hardcore, you go to, Warped, and there's all the tents, with like the names of stuff on it. It was like, 10 Roadrunner tents that was just, the whole thing was a bar with like tables and chairs and a bar. And like everybody, no matter what label they were on, what band they were in, who they worked for, who they wrote for, they were all at the Roadrunner tent all day for 2 days, And so you were like, we like own this fucking thing. It was crazy, and you couldn't have ever gotten that in America. And then I would go back to New York after being there, and it's almost impossible to describe, There were a handful of people there together from America at this thing, and at various other festivals, but this was like the pinnacle, And it was the first time that you saw Roadrunner kind of as this brand almost, even though I don't think we were a brand in the way that like Epitaph was a brand, or something like that, where people bought what was on Epitaph Records or Revelation Records just because it was on that label, I don't think that many people bought stuff on Roadrunner anymore just because it was Roadrunner. I think that was a few years earlier with like the death metal shit, but like, you might have bought Malevolent Creation because you were a fucking Deicide fan, you know?
Yeah.
But I don't think people were buying, you know, they certainly weren't buying Black Train Jack because they were a fucking Machine Head like that, you know? But somehow in Europe, they liked both. I mean, not to the same degree, but like Black Train Jack could open for Machine Head and they would, at the worst, get a very polite response, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in America, people would be like, Machine Head, Machine Head, you know? And it's like, you know, it's just totally different mentality.
Did you try and bring Agnostic Front over with you to Roadrunner?
No, they were still like under contract. And also at that time, they had really broken up.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they even acknowledged that they'd broken up or they called it a hiatus or whatever, you know? So, you know, and Roger obviously gone away for a little while too. But the band was kind of broken up, which is why, for instance, you know, Craig Satari wound up in Sick of It All. You know, that they were kind of gone. It was right around that time because it was around the time of the Just Look Around album for Sick of It All. He finished an AF tour, and 3 weeks, I think 3 weeks or 3 days later, he was in Europe with Sick of It All.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So never to bring AF. Now, if they had become free and they were an active band, I'm sure that some discussion would have happened, you know, because obviously we did sign Madball. So
yeah.
It may have even been Roger who let me know that they wanted to be kind of a real band and make records and tour. So, you know, but, you know, there was never really any meaningful discussion to bring AF to Roadrunner.
And what's his name? The singer of Madball. I always forget his name for some odd reason. Yeah, Freddie. How old was he when they signed to Roadrunner?
So he was 12 in 89.
Oh,
he was 17.
Wow. That's wild, man. To be on a major label at 17.
Completely wild.
Well, I mean, there was that, but then, you know, like we put out that 7-inch when he was 12. I thought that was pretty nuts.
Yeah, that is wild. Yeah, because he got his start with his brother in.
Well, yeah, and even, you know, 5 years before that, because I remember seeing him jump up on stage with Agnostic Front doing a couple of songs when he was 7.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, like Jamie Joss says all the time, unless you're Freddie Madball, nobody was born into hardcore, so get your chip off your shoulders, right?
It was like legit. So not only was he born into it, but then, you know, Roger came and snatched him out of Florida and said, you're not living there anymore. You're coming with me. And, you know, little did he know he was going to be spending a lot of his time on tour.
Wild shit, man.
Completely insane. So, what Madball, I'm assuming, was yours, Howie, bringing them to Roadrunner?
Yeah, so I brought them to Roadrunner. So they like to say from the stage that I signed them twice. But like the thing is that we never signed them the first time. There was no paperwork for, you know, the single we did. It was just kind of like Roger handed me a cassette of those songs and we just pressed it.
And that was Set It Off.
No, this was before. So this was
okay.
Destruction 7-inch.
Oh, yeah.
And then as I was saying, like Hoy and I were trying to figure it out, like who actually hipped me to the fact that they wanted to become a more serious band, you know? So it was, you know, in the late 93, early 94 time, probably late 93, considering I think the album Set It Off came out in like May of 94. So, you know, somebody told me, hey, you know, Madball wants to make an album and they want to tour. They want to be like a, you know, a quote unquote real band. So I wound up running into them and, you know, asking them to come in and hang and have a discussion. And, you know, they echoed it. They were like, no, we want to kind of do this now, you know? And, you know, it wasn't even like, hey, do you have demos of songs I can hear? I didn't care. I was like, you know what? Do you have enough material for an album? Like, can you make at least a half-hour long album, you know? And they were like, yeah, we could do that. I was like, okay, cool. So, you know, we did that. And again, you know, I'd go over to Europe. Like I went over in 94, like after the Madball album was out, like to go on the road with Doggy Dog for a few days or something. And kids were like, they're wearing Madball shirts, you know? And I'm like, why do all these people know who the fuck this band is? And that's when I started to understand how much European Roadrunner had their shit together. because they actually marketed and promoted these bands. So, you'd go over and the band, Madball had been to Europe, but they hadn't, been there to quote unquote support their album yet. And so, but these kids were, had like imported, Madball shirts from America, and they had the records. And the other thing that they did, which was amazing, that you don't really hear as much in America, they do it with dance music and hip hop here, but you'd go over there and go to some rock club, like where, like the Doggy Dog show is happening in Frankfurt, like there's 1,200 kids there, like, like a whatchamacallit, what's the venue in Philly?
The Electric Factory? Oh, Truck. Okay.
Trocadero, right? Size place, right? And every other song is a Roadrunner record, So you'd hear 3 or 4 Madball songs, like over the course of the night at the Doggy Dog show. They would promote, like to the DJs in the clubs, which, again, for rock stuff, that doesn't happen here. Dance music and hip hop, it happens here. But over there, so you couldn't escape even the new bands, because there'd be a review in the magazine, you'd hear it in the club, you'd see an ad somewhere, and then within a reasonable amount of time, the band would come over and tour. It was a machine.
Yeah, it's weird. I always think about, I always thought it would be easier to be in a band and get known in this day and age because you have Facebook, Bandcamp, all that crap. But it seems like,
it's too much.
Yeah. It seems like back then.
That's what you're leading to, right?
Yeah. It seems like back then, because you didn't have the easy access, when you see something like that, you're automatically interested. Yeah.
And that's where I'll show my age, right? That's where when Howie, you alluded to it. I see a band on a label that I know I like 3 other bands.
Right.
Oh, it's on an end cap at Tower Records, and it's the Roadrunner section.
Right.
And here we have Machine Head, we have Typo Negative, we have Life Agony, and what's this Nail Bomb thing? Oh, whatever. It's on the same label. I'll give it a shot. Right. Now there's so much.
That's the thing. Like Tim, also further to what you were saying, it's also in context, right? So it's not this big world of the internet. It's like, I'm already seeing a certain band in this club. I just paid, $10 to get in to see whatever band I'm going to see in whatever city in Germany. And they're playing me other bands that I'm sort of supposed to like. And obviously I'll be the judge of that, but they would play Machine Head and Madball and Typo and Sepultura and all of that stuff. And the other thing was that the bands on the other side of the Atlantic, the American bands, were all crossing paths because they would play the festivals together and all the stuff. So those are the types of shows that bred, these mixed bills that even happened in America, so Madball was from New York, Doggy Dog's from New Jersey. They would never have toured together in America if they didn't meet up at a festival in Europe. And they would go to each other's shows in New York, but it still wouldn't have happened because you didn't think of it the way you did and the way they did in Europe, because anything went, so the Biohazard Doggy Dog tour was huge over there. That's what set it off for for Doggy Dog. But the opener was Downset, right? So Downset benefited from all that. And then suddenly there's, a Madball Doggy Dog Downset tour in America, And again, they had to meet up at some European festival, for that to happen.
Right. Thousands of miles away to come home, meet your neighbor.
You had to cross the Atlantic, to even realize that was a good idea.
I guess that's why it makes sense that a lot of Japanese bands are crazy popular over here, but not there, because you only get them once in a while, and it's like a treat for you when they do come.
Well, there's that, and the fact that again, their music business is more insane than ours. Their underground is more underground, than ours. And I consider ours more underground than Europe, so it's interesting because, you have these outlets, I feel like, in Europe, and also now in South America. South America has grown quite a bit. It's probably, if you ask any aggressive band, what the best market in the world is for their band, it's probably in South America. Wow. So if you look at footage of any hard band, just find their show in Chile, and you'll see the craziest reaction you've ever seen. Because
that's wild.
That's where those kids are the fucking hungriest and still have no inhibitions. They don't care about subgenres. They're like, my favorite band is in front of me and I'm going to kill people right now.
Yeah.
That's the mentality. That's it. There's no like, I don't know about their last record was a little cleaner on the guitar sound than.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have the luxury here.
Shit.
Yeah. We have the luxury to be snobs because we're inundated with it. There's a scarcity principle there.
They're the least snobby in South America.
So let me ask you this, Howie. Out of all the bands that you brought forward to labels and signed, what's the one for you that you still don't get why they weren't bigger than they ended up?
Well, I mean, what's funny is, on some level, being an egomaniac, I feel that about all of them. But I guess I could say there's probably a few, right? But the one that bothers me a lot is Black Train Jack. And I do think that they were really on the verge. Like, I think if they made that third album, they were going to do really, really well, because in New York anyway, this is like at the time when like the Offspring was huge and, Green Day blew up and Blink-182, and not super likening them to those bands, but that's the world that they sort of lived in. Like that, all those bands had the same influences, Descendants and, those types of things. So I felt like they were so on the verge, and they started to get like the opening slots on those shows, right? So Rancid would come to town, after, Out Come the Wolves, and they want Black Train Jack to open. And the Offspring would come to town and they want Black Train Jack to open. And like all those bands were like, we love that band, like they're different. They fit into our world, but they're different. And, they were popular, again, in the like Northeast. They were really big in Philly. Like Philly loved Black Train Jack. And they played like some pretty big shows at the Trocadero, like opening for, Helmet. Like Helmet would go through and they were on that show and things like that. And then they would also still open for Sick of It All at the Troc, but they would open for like the bigger quote unquote alternative bands, And that was starting to happen a little bit for them in Europe, where like the bands that the Epitaph bands and the bigger Fat Records bands would play, they would be able to play too. And so I feel like they were so on the verge, and if they just could have made that third album, and then, Ernie broke the band up, because he wanted to be a teacher. He didn't believe in the band, enough. So he kind of stopped doing it. So they're a band that I feel like people worked really hard on, but it was just a slower in coming, because I signed them virtually the same time I signed Dog Eat Dog. And, Dog Eat Dog, just like everything aligned, just everything you could ever hope for when you're a band and you want to, have fans and be popular. It all just worked for them, And Black Train Jack, it was taking sort of twice as long, but it was happening, and I just wish they'd gotten to that third record.
Right. One more record could have made a difference.
I think so.
So you said you started in 92, correct?
Yes.
So when you started, was Monty there as well?
Monty was there for a few years already.
Okay.
I have to assume he had some of the conversations with the owner about bringing me there, because we knew each other a little bit. We'd run into each other at shows and things like that. And I always thought Monty was a really nice guy, but I wasn't like a death metal guy,
Yeah.
I liked Sepultura and I liked Obituary a little bit, but I wasn't like about Deicide and all that shit. I didn't care about that. And, but I liked him. And so he was there. And he was the Don, like he was the guy who signed everything. There was nobody else really signing bands at that time. And like the whole Hawker thing had sort of come and gone, and so they gave up on that pretty quick. And, it was, again, like when I got there, Sepultura was the biggest band on the label.
So he was the one that brought in Fear Factory, correct?
Yes. So he brought in Fear Factory, who I really, really liked.
Oh, yeah.
And, we wound up sort of collaborating a little bit on some Fear Factory stuff, which was super cool. I really liked them, but also when they came to the label, they were basically a death metal band, but they had these like semi-industrial leanings, on the first album. and but they were a little different. You know, there was a little something different going on, but the vocals were very death metal, and you know, it sounded death metal. So I was talking to Dino, you know, one day, and he's like, man, you know, he goes, I love like that super high BPM techno stuff, you know, like at the time, like before the Prodigy, you know, had a vocalist, they were instrumental, and they had this album called The Prodigy Experience, which was just super high BPM techno, all instrumental, you know, but very aggressive. You know, if you heard it in a club, you know, if you were on a Red Bull, you'd start fucking running around the place.
Yeah.
You know, so
that was the Gabber stuff, Howie, right? Like
well, that was huge in Holland, right? Huge.
Mm-hmm.
And
Nightmares from Rotterdam and all that stuff.
Oh my God.
Records.
And like, and so Roadrunner in Europe had a Gabber label just in Europe.
Shit. Really?
And it wasn't even all of Europe, because like France didn't give a shit about Gabber and England didn't care about Gabber. It was mostly just Germany and Holland. And so they had a label. So later on, there's like all kinds of B-sides and remixes of Roadrunner shit. And you'll hear like Gabber remixes of like Fear Factory and stuff. But, you know.
I still listen to that some. And I think remanufacture is great. I think it's awesome.
We would go over to Holland, and some guy who worked in the Dutch office that we didn't know would take us to like a Gabber rave, like an hour outside of Amsterdam. And there's like 3,000 fucking aggro dudes, like almost no girls. It was kind of like hardcore or metal.
Yeah.
There were no girls there at all. Just going berserk to the same tempo, same kick sound, like, you know, insanity. Like, I don't even know what the BPM was on these fucking records. And it was just crazy, like sonic overload, you know, for a few hours. And of course the thing didn't start till like midnight, you know, so you know, you get there at like 1 a.m. and it's just going till 6, 7, you know, and I'm like, we're not staying till 6 or 7, sorry. I can do this for an hour, you know.
Yeah, I don't know how you listen. It's like the real extreme metal where you can't.
It's not like listen to it kind of shit, you know.
No.
So anyway, so Dino is telling me how much he loves this shit, and he's like, you know, we had Frontline Assembly on the label with Roadrunner, and he goes, man, he goes, I would love to work with somebody, you know, like Frontline Assembly, like on a song or whatever. And I'm like, well, why don't you do something like that? And he was like afraid of like the 10 death metal weenies on the fucking message boards, you know, like complaining that they're selling out, you know? And I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I'm not his A&R guy, so I could say whatever the fuck I want to him. It's sort of a luxury, you know? I'm like, you know how many people don't know who your band is, right? Compared to how many who do. And he's like, well, I guess you kind of have a point there, right? And that's when we came up with the idea to do the Fear is the Mind Killer EP. And that was sort of my idea, you know, which was like, why don't you do like a few songs remixed in this style? So it's like, you're not really committing, and you're not saying this is what your factory is going to sound like in the future, but you're playing to like Roadrunner Europe and your European fans who are more open-minded and hear this shit all the time, like hear music like this all over the place in multiple countries, you know? And he's like, okay, that's a cool idea. So I hooked him up with Reese Fulber.
I was just going to say Reese. Yep.
Yeah. And I'd become friendly with Reese, and because Reese loved metal, you know, and he loved punk bands and hardcore bands, you know? So, you know, I would talk, and we'd talk about anything but Frontline Assembly, you know? Whereas Bill Lieb, the singer of Frontline Assembly, only wanted to talk about Frontline Assembly, and how shitty the label was, you know? So, you know, basically they clicked, you know, Dino and Reese, and he became their producer for multiple albums. He shaped their sound, like all that stuff. So Monty gives me a little credit for that, you know, even though he signed the band. But like, you know, it worked out great for both parties there.
So Reese is doing, not to call you, I'm sorry, Jay. I think Reese is doing, because Fear Factory's putting a new record out in next year. I think Reese is working on that record as well.
I think he is. And then, you know, Bert just left.
Yeah.
So
crazy.
Like, I don't know who the vocalist is going to be. I have to imagine it's somebody extremely influenced by Bert. But I don't know. Like, I'm curious. But yeah, Reese and Dino have like a real musical connection. I think they were the two that sort of really, really made this work. And, you know, Bert likes, you know, Einsters and Neubauten, and he likes Sisters of Mercy, and he likes Bauhaus, and he likes gothy stuff and industrial stuff. So, certainly he and Reese connected on that too. But I think that Dino presented an interesting challenge for Reese with the guitars. And he even recognized I need to bring in like an amazing engineer, to capture, that I'm not the guy to mic up those amps, I could put it in with these beats and I can make this all make sense and I can get great vocal performances out of Bert. But, I need somebody who knows how to do this.
Get that sound.
Yeah. I think what's his name from Spine Shank is going to take over vocal duties in Fear Factory.
You think Johnny Santos, you think?
Yeah. Because
not a reach.
Because Spine Shank was a big, or Fear Factory was a big part of Spine Shank getting signed to Roadrunner.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think they may have given demos to Monty.
Yeah, that for sure. And I mean, I think he fits the vocal perfectly for them.
But I mean, do they have like a current relationship?
I would assume so.
Yeah, I just don't know,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But I just think that's going to happen because, I mean, honestly, you really don't have Fear Factory without, Burton.
His vocals are what really set them apart from the other bands in that.
Yeah, because I think it's somewhere between. Well, it's tough to say because if you listen to like Demanufacture, right? It's like it really is a unit. You know what I mean? It's like Raymond's drumming, Dino's guitar tone, Bert's vocals, Christian's bass stuff. It's like it really is like. There's certainly some stuff you could probably take out of there and it still could be great. But I think Raymond's drumming was a big part of that too. And yes, it's all triggered and shit, but like he is very precise and he has like incredible feet, like his
oh my God, yeah.
Is insane.
Before I forget, because this just came to my head, and me and Jay always talk about Ross Robinson. Have you ever met him?
I met him, but I've actually never worked with him.
Okay.
But I met him a few times, but like way before he really, really blew up. Like I think I met him not very long after the first Korn album happened.
Okay.
So there was a band that wound up coming out later that you might be familiar with called Human Waste Project. Do you remember them?
Amy Echo. Yep.
So I heard some early demos of theirs and I thought they were really good. And so I went out to California and I saw them and I hung out with them and like all this stuff. And they had already committed and Ross had already committed to them to make their album. So they were like, why don't you go meet Ross? Or come with us to meet Ross. So, and I wanted to meet him anyway, because like he was becoming that guy, like people were all into him. So this could have been 93 actually still, like before, a lot of the stuff he did after the first Korn album even happened. And so I got to meet him and he just was like this super nerdy, like unassuming guy, but his recording style was murder, it was like, I want the most murder to come out of those, to come into those mics, and so I really liked his style because I always liked, I love the idea of like trying to get Amy Echo's vocals with like a super dirty, heavy record, that was like my thing, even a little bit like with Die Monster Die, right? Which was the whole, like Alice has this pretty, vocal, but they're still dirty. Like the band is dirty ass fuzz box, heavy bass tones, like, with her vocals. And I always love that shit. It's like, even like Siamese Dream, Smashing Pumpkins, right? It's like, Billy Corgan's vocals and the guitars still almost sound like they're metal guitars, they're very big sounding and heavy, but with this like weirdo, almost thin alternative voice on it,
Right. Howie, were you involved in VOD coming to Roadrunner?
Yeah, I signed VOD.
Okay.
So it was interesting because they were already on my radar, just because being in New York, I mean, they were so friggin' popular on Long Island. Like I'd never seen.
Oh, those PWAC shows, the pictures
I've never seen anything like it in my life anywhere. It was, kind of a crazy thing. And I had signed Shelter and, so Shelter, the Mantra album did really, really well. Same thing, big in Europe and, did well in America too, actually, but really big in Europe. And so, I'm talking to Ray, we hung out a bunch. I swear to God, it may have even been at the Krishna Temple. He's like, I think I may want to start another label. And, he was instrumental in starting Revelation Records. And I was like, okay, cool. I was like, why don't we put it through Roadrunner? And so this idea for this imprint came about that he was going to call Super Soul. And we started talking about bands, and either I brought it up, he brought it up, or we brought it up at the same time, VOD, And so, because they were there was nothing like them at all as an unsigned band in the area. And we went to that PWAC show, that peak PWAC show, where there were 1,700 people there. And they did not have an album out, And I'm not talking about they were there for an incredible bill. I'm talking about they were there. If nobody opened the show, the same 1,700 people would have been there.
That's insane.
It was unbelievable. That's like a Trocadero and a half, picture, but packed, right? Like that's how many people were there. And they knew every word to their EP, just intense, and they were just so good, it wasn't just the spectacle of it. They were that good, and there was nobody like them. I mean, they don't get enough credit for that next wave of like quote unquote metalcore, like they were the ones who I think just nailed it,
They're ridiculously influential.
Are they a metal band? Are they a hardcore band? Are they like, disciples of Korn, but heavier? Like, I don't know, like, cause they loved Korn, like when I would talk to them, their guitar players loved Korn and they tuned their guitars like them. And they, they sort of moved like them a little bit with that, like, that like stiff, fucking headbang weirdness that the guys in Korn used to do. And then Tim was just prowling the stage and was incredible. And I just love those guys, love them.
That record, that self-titled record, or it's self-titled, right?
Yeah, self-titled, yeah.
That record is absolutely incredible.
And what's funny is we all talk about it, about how disappointed in it we are.
I seen him say that. Yeah.
I think it was.
I'll be right back,
guys. For No Echo, they just did a piece on it. Yeah.
So he did a thing about like the anniversary of the album, and so he was like, "Hey, I just talked to those guys. Do you want to chime in on making the album?" I'm like, "Sure." So they had already talked about it a little bit because they made incredible demos. Only a couple of songs like for the album. And that's when we were like, we have to do this. Like these demos are fucking incredible. And so they're like, well, what should we do? I'm like, why? And they reminded me of this. I don't even remember having this conversation with them, but I remembered it after they said it. I was like, why don't you just do this where we did the demos? And if the guy isn't killing mixes, we'll just get someone to mix it, and just, just do what you just did. It sounds amazing. And they were like, no. And they were, for whatever reason, they needed to go to, like a bigger studio with a sort of quote unquote, not a name producer, but someone that had done some records that they liked,
right,
and things like that. And I'm like, all right, like it's not a bad idea, but just, I don't know why you're bothering. Like, why don't we just go
with what you know? Yeah.
The studio's on the island. You can go home every night. Like whatever, like I think that's what you should do. And they didn't want to do that. And then I found out later that they said that in the interview in No Echo. But I just felt like when you heard them play those songs, you felt one way. And then when you heard that recording, it was just so tame by comparison that it just irked me. And, I felt like the demos, not to like be too demo-itis out, but like the demos just nailed it better. It felt like more comfortable, like that they were more comfortable recording that stuff. And then when they went to the studio, it felt like they were too conscious of being in a quote unquote real studio.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. I mean, I swear, I still think Imprint is my favorite.
The thing
that gets me with Imprint. What'd you say, Howie?
The song or the album?
The album.
Me too.
And what gets me and
that album kills. Like that album is just steamroller.
The mix is it's real right up there in your face. The thing that when I point this thing out to people, you can't stop hearing it.
Yeah.
The fact that in What You Are, you can hear Tim inhale before you can tell he's using his full vocal power to get those lines out. It is just the most aggressively abrasive delivery.
But picture the songs of the first album with that production.
Oh, it would have been just a juggernaut.
Like that to me is what I think we wanted, or closer to what we wanted. And, we just couldn't get it, but it didn't hurt them because the good news is that the material was super strong. Yeah. So the material, even, the fact that some of it had been on their EP and everything, it shined through and it didn't matter, so, it made people go see them. And, once you saw it and you saw them play those songs and you saw kids react to it, that was that,
Yeah.
At the same time, I think if it was re-recorded, though, it would kind of lose its – because I like it because it's raw.
Yeah.
And it's just got the emotion in it. I think now if it was recorded on like a Pro Tools rig, and it would just take away from it for me.
Yeah, I don't think their performances are bad. I just think the way it's put together is just not right. It just feels too – too slick studio, it doesn't feel, you don't have to have every album that feels like the band playing, so to speak, but it didn't feel natural to me. Like it felt like, maybe the guitars were recorded a different day than the bass, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm, and it should never feel that way.
Okay, yeah. I want to go real quick back to Sepultura. I know you said that huge tour they did was with refresh my memory. I'm sorry.
Well, they did one with Sabbath.
Yeah, that tour, with the arena tour.
That was an arena tour, like a shed tour, and then so like the PNC Bank Arts Center kind of.
Okay.
And then you had the Ministry Helmet tour.
That's right. Now was this like the same tour where they played Brazil and there was like a huge riot and stuff?
I think that was before that. I think it was before because they were always gigantic in Brazil. I mean, they played like Rock in Rio and, they played like the big rock festival in Brazil. And, things were always just like on edge at places like that. That's what's so interesting about South America now is like, I hear about like underground bands going over there for the first time years ago. And there's always like we had to stand around the airport while the promoter bribed, the customs people. And, and we're standing there for 2 hours and then we get like hey, come on. And it's like, we just walked through. They never looked at passports. They didn't care. Like, whatever. It was just, they paid the right amount of money finally.
Yeah. Some money got passed along.
It was just
all right, come on.
But then later on, it was like very legit. Like a few years later, like you went and, you didn't need the promoter to stand there and pay anybody. And, but like a lot of the South American countries, that's kind of what it was like. And, Sick of It All talks about, in the book about the first time they went to certain places in South America. And they're like, that's what it was like. You would stand there and you're like, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? And then the promoter who was standing there with everybody in a uniform for 2 hours just said, okay, we can go now.
Yeah.
So they agreed on a price basically.
Yeah. Speaking of that Sick of It All book, I have that next in queue. I got to finish this one book I'm at now, and then that's my next one. It's taken me forever. I feel like COVID, I was going to read more, but I'm reading less now. It's like the weirdest
So what are you
thing.
reading now?
I'm reading the book, that dude from Ministry. What the hell's his name again? I'm forgetting everything. No, I read that one already.
Chris Connolly's book?
Yeah.
That one's not too bad either, but it's taken me forever to get through it, so.
Yeah, the Al Jorgensen book's crazy.
It is wild.
So yeah, Jay told me about that, and I read it, and I never laughed that much reading.
See, you know what's great about that book is like I believe it.
Yeah.
It's like I'm pretty damn sure that 98% of that shit happened the way it's being told. And then you read like a Dave Mustaine's book, and you're like, this is all bullshit.
I have that. I just got that as well.
Well, that's the new one. I'm talking about the autobiography, not the Rust in Peace one, the first one.
No, I have the autobiography. Is that the new one?
The first Mustaine book first of all, he omits everything as a fan or not a fan, whatever. Whatever you think of the band, he omits everything you want to know. Okay. So he doesn't talk about anything juicy at all. Then the shit that he does talk about, you're sure he's lying.
Okay.
So I hate that feeling reading the book. Like I gave up on it, like 30, 40 pages in because I was like, this is bullshit. Like,
yeah.
Okay. No way. Certainly not being open, and I don't even think he's telling the truth.
Okay. I'll still read it though.
He's an interesting personality.
Yeah, you could say that.
Me and Jay always joke about in the Jurgensen book where he's just like, sometimes you just gotta suck a dick to know if you like it. I thought that was the fucking funniest thing ever.
I was texting Tim. Howie, I was texting Tim. I was sitting in the pool and I read that line and I burst out laughing and I said, Tim, you have to buy this book. Yeah. Sometimes you got to suck a dick to know if you like suck a dick. And he's like, wait, Al Jurgensen says that? I'm like, dude, just buy the book. Just buy the book.
Hilarious shit.
Speaking of sucking dicks, I guess I got to get the Rob Halford book.
Oh, he has one too?
It just came out. It's called Confess.
Okay.
I'm very curious. I'll just never forget. And I think he's a fucking hero. Like I love.
Dude, they're sick live, man.
There's all that. There's the band and all that. But just, and this is one of the things that made him a hero to me. I remember when he first publicly came out, like it was on MTV. And he did like a really long interview about, about coming out and being gay and being in Judas Priest and being gay and like all this stuff. And he goes, he's like, I think back to all the times we played these arenas and all these boys are singing along. And I'm like, I think they think I'm talking about girls. He's like, that's what's in my head, And like, because he really he was afraid of saying out loud that he was gay because of the world he was operating in, And he was like, I don't want to ruin my career. I don't want to ruin the career of the guys in the band, that like all this time they're like, singing along to these lyrics. And then I'm like, yep, they're all about dudes. And, so he was just like in this weird place, but then he finally just said it. And I was also proud of like the metal community for not giving a shit.
Yeah. I mean, great. Yeah. They're a great fucking band. So who cares?
You know? I mean, you have like your 1 in 100 knucklehead, who cared.
Yeah.
You're like, well, you're a fucking moron anyway. So like,
exactly.
There's one in every bunch, right?
If some dude being gay ruins a band for you, you grow the fuck up. I mean, come on.
You've definitely got some issues and probably should never,
spawn.
Never go to therapy.
Yeah.
Find out some things about yourself you don't like.
Yeah.
Dude, I seen Priest at Ozfest, and that was one of my favorite sets of that day, man. That shit was great.
So good.
Talented musicians are talented musicians. It doesn't. At the end of the day, you can tell. You can tell when they're putting their heart in what they do. Howie, I do want to ask you. So you're a hardcore guy, right? Roadrunner Records. Were you involved with Earth Crisis coming on from?
That was after my time. Like so.
Okay.
So when I left, they hired Mike Gitter, who was a friend as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure it was him. I think he brought in Earth Crisis. And, truth be told, I'm not the biggest Earth Crisis guy, but like, it's funny, like, cause they got on my radar around the same time as Snapcase. And I love Snapcase, but I never loved Earth Crisis.
It's Snapcase, Earth Crisis, Strife. I find most people like 2 out of the 3.
Yeah. And they I remember like there was a tour with the 3 of them, I think pre-COVID or just pre-COVID, weren't they going on the road together? Like
they did a California takeover, like they did it again.
And it was going to come out East too.
Yeah.
And it happened. And like, cause I remember that there was like this whole, like, that era, whatever 90s, whatever that was, that they brought that all together and were doing a run of shows.
Yeah, Jamie was trying to get Hatebreed on, or Vision of Disorder on as well.
Oh, okay,
yeah. He's trying. He was on his podcast. He was talking about doing like it was Hatebreed, Earth Crisis, VOD, and like Candiria, which is another interesting band. Howie, how come they never ended up on like a Roadrunner or any one of those type of places?
Oh, Hatebreed?
Candiria.
Oh, Candiria. So Candiria was an interesting band who I happen to really, really like. The thing with them is, they kind of like, it never felt like they were a full-time band. You know, it sort of felt like they would make a record, they would do a little bit of shows, and then they would just kind of disappear again. You know, they never felt that particularly committed to like making the album, doing the album cycle of like, you know, go out on the road for a bunch of months, promote the record, go to Europe, do the same. If you can go to Japan, do that. If you can go to South America or wherever, do that. They just never struck me as like the pro bands, you know, like it goes back to what I was saying, you know, about Madball earlier, that they had to basically let it be known that they wanted to do that, you know, that they, you know, they were not going to be like the part-time, make an EP and sort of play a couple of shows and go back to doing whatever they were doing. They wanted to dedicate themselves to the band. And so I thought that was pretty cool. And that's what, you know, I heard that and then I was like, oh, let's talk. I love them. You know, it's just, I didn't know that they wanted to do that. So then it's funny that Candiria winds up on Metal Blade, you know, like a billion years later, when it's, I don't want to say, you know, let's say the heat was off of them, you know, it wasn't really, you know, all the bands that they influenced were popular now, you know, as opposed to them. And they would always be looked at as a great band and an influence and, you know, influential and whatever, but it's not like people were dying to see Candiria anymore. And part of that had to do with like, you didn't know if they were still a band and you didn't know if they'd ever make another record. And, you know, people want to at least attach themselves to the band and what they do. And I don't think you ever knew what the hell they were going to do.
Yeah, nothing's worse than picking up a CD, finding the band, saying, holy shit, this is fantastic. And then they either break up or they disappear and you're like, well, what the hell's going on?
Well, I think they did that like 3 times, you know, and then they got like into that accident and terrible, obviously. And, you know, so even then it was like, are they still going to be a band? Are they, you know, I don't know what's happening. Like, I'm not sure what they're doing. But I always really liked them. You know, a lot of bands tried to do what they did, you know, afterward with the whole mathcore thing. And, you know, you have to have some serious ass musicians in your band to do that.
Yeah.
You gotta have Ken.
Gotta be incredible.
Yeah, you gotta have Ken.
Unbelievable. Just
Ken
unbelievable.
One of the sickest drummers I've ever seen play, like where I was in the room with him, you know, like watching his band play. Watching him is unbelievable.
Yeah, he's absolutely ridiculous drummer.
So how – go on, Tim. Go on.
So I want to bring it back to like their 93, 94. So Century Media was going on back then as well, right?
Pretty sure, yeah.
So a label like them with you guys, like how many times did you guys like not per se fight, but like how many bands were like kind of like, all right, we might go Century Media, but then Roadrunner comes in with a deal? Like did that happen a lot back then?
It probably happened to Monty more than it happened to me, especially at that time. And I will say that, you know, as we were talking about earlier, 93, 94, Roadrunner wasn't going to lose a band to fucking Century Media or, you know, any of those labels. It just wasn't going to happen at that point because they were probably where Roadrunner had been 3 years earlier, you know? So they weren't able to like up a budget, you know, and be like, okay, we'll pay you $5,000 more or $10,000 more and you sign with us, you know? They couldn't do that. Roadrunner could, you know? And so, you know, there would be that time when you guys were looking at, you know, the same band. Like I have to imagine like when Monty was trying to sign Fear Factory, Century Media had to know all about them and, you know, that kind of stuff, but they weren't going to get them over Roadrunner. Machine Head probably even, you know, any sort of heavier metal type band, you know, Century Media was likely aware of them, but I have to think there was not a lot of competition at that point. But then, you know, even when I was in Effect, at some point, like even major labels were after bands that we were looking at, you know, at the very beginning they weren't. And then later they were. I mean, if you look at, you know, the roster I had in Effect, so Sick of It All wound up on a major label. 24/7 Spies was on a major label. Scatterbrain was on a major label. You know, it just sort of kept happening. You know, it was the nature of like how that music was viewed by that time. And, you know, I'd like to think a little bit of it is because we did a good job, you know? So, you know, Sick of It All is the only band that truly progressed and probably became a bigger band on a major than they were with us. And we did really well. You know, I know how many records we sold, and I was in shock at how well we did. But then, you know, they had for a while, they had people that really gave a shit about them there. And they did quite well. Whereas like Scatterbrain sold a fraction of what we sold for them. And I have to imagine 24/7 Spies didn't do nearly as well either. You know, when you're the big fish in the small pond, and the small pond does kind of have a clue. Like, I like to think we at least kind of knew what we were doing, even though we were kids and we were learning on the job. The passion, like, I think pushed a lot of things forward, you know, and made things happen. Whereas there, you're just another fucking record in the catalog, and like, you got to hope that, you know, that people give a shit, you know.
So did Sony end up buying In Effect? Is that who that was?
Well, they bought the whole company, yeah. So
okay.
Sony bought, you know, Important Records, Relativity, the whole thing. So they had all the bands, and they wound up sort of dropping a lot of the bands. They kept a handful of them, and then fired a whole bunch of the staff. So that was bye-bye Howie.
Oh yeah.
But what was cool is then I took some time off. I was just sort of like dicking around trying to figure out, like, what do I do next? Like, what did I just do? Like, what did I, you know, just finish doing? I'm not even sure. And then once I got sort of a handle on it, it was funny because I got, you know, that call from Monty saying, hey, you know, the owner of the company wants to talk to you. And that's how I wound up going over to Roadrunner.
So all right. So back to Roadrunner. So you signed Dog Eat Dog first, right? That's your first band.
It was either first or I can't remember if I signed Black Train Jack first or them first, but they were both like weeks or months apart, you know?
All right. So how do I always wondered this, and I don't know how much you would know about it, but I'm pretty sure you'd know a lot about it. But how do they figure out like the budgets they give these bands for records? Like, I always wondered that.
Well, that's all kind of done at the beginning, right? So, you know, like I could tell you with In Effect, it was a bit more specific because it was brand new, right? So Roadrunner was already up and running and, you know, had like a bit of a formula as to how they did things. But with In Effect, it was a little different because it's like, okay, this is going to be like a new company, a new branch of the tree. How many bands do you think you want to sign in the first year? Okay. Here's kind of what I think we could spend signing bands and making records, right? So I was like, okay, for that amount of money, we could probably sign, I don't know, 3-4 bands, right? And so that's kind of how it gets figured out. So it wasn't like some random, you know, gee, if I were to make a Madball album, like what would we spend on that? Like, you know what I mean? It was, that was later, you know? So it was much more, and Roadrunner, they had the sort of what, they paid, you know, metal bands and what they sold, and sort of based off of that conversation, at least we could figure out what we thought was smart. And again, the beauty of it was that the record would also come out all over Europe at the same time. So you had a bigger outlet to release the album. It wasn't like, you know, with In Effect, you basically assumed you were just releasing the record in America or not even North America, just America. And if Canada did it too, you know, great. But it was really kind of America. And with Roadrunner, you know, you knew it was going to come out in Germany and Holland and England. And then, you know, like you'd see if it would come out in France and Japan and Brazil and things like that. But you had kind of an idea that it was going to come out elsewhere too. And like, for instance, Dog Eat Dog, what was interesting is the way I even heard the demo. Like, I had heard of the band because they were local, but I hadn't heard this demo, the Allboro Kings demo, because they had given it to Billy from Biohazard. And Billy from Biohazard went on tour in Europe and gave it to somebody in the Dutch office who sent it to me.
So it went to Europe to come back here.
It came from Brooklyn to Holland to Manhattan. And that's how that worked. And I was like, oh, I've been meaning to hear this, you know, but I hadn't gone to a show to buy a demo or anything, you know, so I hadn't seen them yet. So I heard the demo and I thought that they were onto something, that they were doing something at least different, you know, and they were only really kind of playing hardcore shows, but like, you know, and then I found out like, oh no, those kids kind of draw in Jersey, you know, and then they were playing like the smaller, like real kind of indie hardcore shows in the city, in the 5 boroughs, you know, and, you know, so I went to see them, and then I went to see them in Jersey, and, you know, I was like, you know, what do you guys think about recording? And they're like, well, we don't have that many songs. You know, so I was like, well, let's do an EP, you know, instead. And that was the, you know, the Dog Eat Dog Warrant EP. And, you know, and what it did is it got them going on the East Coast, right? So outside of just New York and Jersey. So they got to play Boston, and they got to play Rhode Island, and they played DC, and, you know, like all of that in Virginia. And now there's something a little bit more meaningful going on. And somehow they got asked to go to the UK with the Bad Brains, because Daryl Jennifer, you know, knew of the guys and like all this stuff. So they wound up doing 11 dates in the UK with Bad Brains at the very end of the EP, you know, and they went over and they made, you know, enough of an impact that then, you know, when they were going to go do an album, Biohazard asked them to go to Europe with them and do like a whole shitload of dates. So we released the album, and then they went and did like 40 shows in Europe with Biohazard, who were massive on an underground level at the time. Like they were drawing, you know, between probably 1,000 and 3,000 people a show. And 40 shows, that's a lot of fucking people.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, a lot of merch sold, and
they're playing like 90, 100,000 people over the course of that tour. And like, so Dog Eat Dog's going to go open the tour. And they just started getting noticed because they did a really good live show, and they, you know, the journalists would see them and the kids would see them. And, you know, Biohazard had the whole tough guy thing, and Dog Eat Dog were like the kid next door skater guys, you know, who, you know, were like, you know, like a lighter Rage Against the Machine, or, you know, not political, like much more let's smoke weed and party kind of shit, you know? And it just worked, you know? And the media started noticing, and MTV started noticing, and like all the shit. And like, you know, that's just because Roadrunner had that setup over there. Like it was just incredible. So right place, right time, right band.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this too. Like, I think
going back just to link it to what you asked before.
Yeah.
We made that record. I'm not going to say the amount because that's their business.
Yeah.
You'd be shocked at what we made the album for that sold 600,000 copies.
Yeah. Because I heard Il Nino got $300,000 just to record a record. I was like, Jesus Christ.
Well, I'll just say for the record that if I'd been there, that would have happened over my dead body.
That it's a bit of a running joke, Howie, between me and Tim and actually Adam from Ill Street, where we always talk about it. I think it was Dave Chavari got interviewed by Doc Coyle, where he talked about how they got $500,000 to make that first album, and we were
they had 500.
We were like,
right, yeah.
The guy with the bongos got $100,000. Like, wait,
holy shit! Yeah.
Let's take it down a notch and even say they got $200,000. That's absurd.
Mm-hmm.
For a new metal record. Yeah,
it is.
And for that band at that time, like what? Like you were talking about competition between labels. That's when you got to go, okay, if somebody else is willing to pay that for you, go do it. Because I'm probably not going to lose any sleep over you being somewhere else.
Yeah. So you being A&R, did you get the choice of producer as well?
Well, I collaborated, you know, it's still Roadrunner Records, you know.
Okay.
Not Sony, you know, where like you're kind of dictating sometimes, but it was always a collaboration, you know. So like in the case of VOD, going back to that, I was telling them to slum it, you know, and they were like, no, we want to do this, which again wasn't like a particularly expensive venture, but it was always really about what's the right thing, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, so basically it was just kind of like, who do you want? Like, who would you envision producing your album, you know? And some bands would have an idea, and then some bands were like, I don't know. You know, like Madball's like, I don't know, we just want it to sound great, you know, like, what do you think? And we would talk about it. And then there were other bands that would be like, oh, well, you know, we want, you know, somebody who would cost like $500,000, you know, so
Steve Albini. Yeah.
You know, like, but just, you know, they would come up with like, you know, whoever produced, the Green Day album, or, shit like that, where you're like, they probably got like 150 grand and 4 points, and that's just their fee, and then you still have to pay for the studio time, and not happening, stop dreaming, blow up, and then you can do whatever you want. But not a first album. So it was always collaborative. I thought it was always smarter that way anyway. I could talk a band off the ledge if I needed to, if I thought they were going the wrong direction. I could try to nudge them in the right direction if they didn't have, any ideas to start with, and we would just try to come up with what made sense.
I think some bands are better off going to that smaller guy. To your point about VOD, Howie, who knows the sound, right? So look at a guy like what's his name from Converge, the God City Studios, Kurt Ballou, right?
Yeah,
he knows that sound. Will Putney knows that sound.
Yeah.
And taking it back to Sepultura, Obituary, the guys down in Morrisound in Florida, right? Rutan, they knew that sound.
You have a guy like Tu Madsen, right? Who he's done Sick of It All, and Madsen just kills it, just totally gets, kids are used to seeing this band play, right? And murder in front of them. And it has to feel like that. You know what I mean? If it doesn't feel like that, we're making a mistake.
Absolutely. So I want to ask this too, all the shows like Dynamo and stuff that you went to, back then it seems like the partying was also a huge part of the being in the band. How big was the partying? Because it seems like even in Europe it was bigger too, the party scene and all that stuff. So how many nights have you forgotten?
More than more than I could possibly remember. But put it this way, the company was headquartered in Amsterdam.
Okay. Yeah.
So
there you go.
Let me give you a little idea. So basically, this is a funny story too. So 95 Dynamo, you go to Holland. You literally, you usually land in the morning, when you fly over to Europe, and it's what time do the coffee shops open? All you wanted to do is get high. And so, and it's such a weird experience because now it's legal in a lot of states here and whatever, but it was legal nowhere at that time, except there. And technically it's not legal there. It's decriminalized and it's organized, and, there's a lot of rules, but you're the ugly, if you're walking down the street smoking a joint, you're the ugly American, that's, you're not supposed to do that. So we'd go over there and we'd get all our Dutch friends, and they would take us to the top, what was the coffee shop that won the Cannabis Cup, this year? We want to go there, what was the strain that won, and we'd go there. But, it's weed, it's hash. You could buy mushrooms in a store there. Again, not supposed to be able to, but everybody would sort of know where you could go to do that. And of course, all the bands knew that. So, they all had their ways of buying a ton of shit and then taking it on the bus somehow. So if the bus got pulled over, that, they sort of have their hiding place, or, whatever. Everybody had their ritual, for the shit. So we're at Dynamo 95, and I was a big weed smoker at the time. And going to Disneyland, you're going to fucking Holland. So we were in Amsterdam before we went off to Eindhoven for the festival. So went to the coffee shop, bought a bunch of shit, whatever. Then I get to the festival, and there's just drugs everywhere. There's weed everywhere. There's hash everywhere. People are tripping. It's Woodstock, but it's okay. That's the thing, and you don't realize it, that you're in this place where you can do this, right? So at the Roadrunner tent that I told you about, and we're smoking weed, and the owner of Roadrunner comes over, and I see him, and I'm hiding my joint and blah, blah, blah. And of course I was so high that somebody said, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "What do you mean? What am I doing?" They're like, "What do you, it's like drinking a beer in front of him. You wouldn't hide your beer, right?" And I'm like, shit, I never thought of that, because it was new, but there was just something about that label being headquartered in Holland, that made it very, very interesting. And I was never a big drinker. So weed was my thing. So I was never drunk. I always felt like kind of aware. And then, you know, people start telling you about space cakes, right? So, you know, eating weed is very different than smoking weed. And it takes a really long time to kick in. So you think it's not working.
Yep.
And so I remember one of the days of that dynamo, like earlier in the day, somebody given me like a brownie or whatever, and I ate it. Definitely ate more than I should have to begin with. It's an hour later. I don't feel anything. So I start smoking and it kicks the whole thing in. Oof. There's some footage. I don't remember what bands. It may be Life of Agony, where you see some guy on the second level of the main stage where the scaffolding is. And like the legs are hanging over and just sitting there. That's me, because I couldn't move. Like I sat there for like 4 bands straight, you know, and I couldn't function. Like, because it was so strong and I had no idea what I'd just done, you know. And again, the eating weed commitment is major.
Yeah, that would have been a panic attack for me right there.
Oh, well, but it turned into it. That's why I had to quit weed.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I'm not a band member. Now picture the band members.
Who have to perform.
And the things that they would do, you know.
Yeah, it's wild, man.
So I'm gonna ask you this, Howie. You know, you're a local guy. WSOU. Were you at like the 10th anniversary bash? Because that was a whole bunch of Roadrunner bands. That was Fear Factory. That was Dog Eat Dog.
The one like out in like the
Asbury. That was the Asbury Park Convention Center.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And then there was another one later
in Newark.
If it was 15, it was like on a football field kind of thing with bleachers and shit.
Yeah, that was so the 10th was in Asbury Park at the Asbury Park Convention Center. The 15th was at the Newark Bears baseball stadium.
Right, in Newark. See, now the thing is, SOU was probably the closest glue there was to the Roadrunner bands here, right? Because that's something that they did all share here, right? So like Dog Eat Dog, for all their struggles in America, huge on SOU.
Oh, SOU, that's where I heard them. I grew up in North Jersey, so right. WSOU is just what you listen to.
Huge on SOU, Life of Agony, Typo, Machine Head, Madball, Black Trail, every one of them big on SOU. And so, you know, picture like those bands would come back from the, you know, all the festivals all summer, and they do these SOU things, and like that, it felt similar, you know, except with less people, but a lot of people, you know. But they were interesting that way, because it felt like they were the closest thing in America to bringing all of that together here.
Good question. So let's get into the whole new metal phase. So when Korn gets huge, obviously they weren't on Roadrunner, but does Roadrunner see that and say, hey, we can capitalize on bands like that? Is that how that works in the whole record industry?
I mean, I would say there was at least some of that, right?
Okay.
Incidentally, Sick of It All took them on their first American tour.
Yeah, that's wild.
Born on the
wild.
Yep.
You know, the management company said, I want them to tour with like a professional band and see what it's like to actually be on the road. Sick of It All in a van and Korn in a bus. So yeah, I have to imagine, you know, you're following what the trends are, you know, so it's like the alternative stuff had been big, obviously, you know, the pop punk stuff and whatever. And then along comes new metal, right? And so, you know, you'd be doing a disservice to the company you worked for if you didn't pay attention to it.
Yeah.
You know, and like Korn, obviously, I mean, they started a whole thing, you know, and I didn't realize it was sort of going to go to the places that it went, and like sort of, you know, there was a while, but by far they were the biggest band, and then along comes, you know, their shitty tattoo artist Limp Bizkit, and you know, basically look what happens to them, like 10 million records or whatever. And then, you know, it goes into even later, like you have the Linkin Park extension, but, you know, but then there's the real, like, quote unquote, new metal stuff, and all of those bands that had that same tuned down, you know, the guitars sound like a bass, you know, tuning. It was an interesting time. And like, you know, a lot of people kind of shit on it, but And I wasn't a huge fan of the sound, but I respected it. And I thought the first Korn album was great. I thought that like, for them to have come out of nowhere with that was very impressive.
Absolutely.
And they had a look and they had a sound, and then they would play and you're like, oh, they're different, but they were still kind of heavy, and there was something interesting, and it was songy, and you had a real singer and front man, and, and I appreciated it. So it was definitely noticed, like how conscious, like I couldn't tell you if Monty and Case said, we must sign nu metal. Like something tells me they probably did, but, I'm not sure if I never heard that conversation,
Yeah. I always wondered that. Like they said, they see a Korn and they're like, because it actually surprises me that Korn wasn't on Roadrunner, because it seems like back then it would have been a big fit,
I don't understand. I'm trying to remember what the order of events was, like how they wound up on Epic to start.
Well, that was Ross, right?
Well, Ross had something to do with it for sure.
Yeah.
Because I think he did demos with them, right? And then
yeah.
Did like their management pay for the album before it was released, maybe, and they shopped the finished album? I don't remember. Like I've heard so many stories. I'm not even 100% sure which one is accurate, but I remember, their management threw a lot of money around at them, and then they managed Limp Bizkit and threw a lot of money around. If you remember, there were those like tons of cassettes that they made, those like, what were they, like 3-song cassettes of Limp Bizkit that, you'd go to any show and like somebody would hand you one.
Oh, they were everywhere. They were ubiquitous.
They made tens and tens of thousands of them, maybe hundreds of thousands of them. And so, when you're marketing and promoting like that, it's like, if you're any good, people are obviously going to hear you.
Yeah, definitely. So speak on the nu metal front. Like, were you involved in any of the signings of like a nu metal band? Like, when did you leave Roadrunner?
So I left in '97.
Okay.
So, like the nu metal thing had obviously already gotten very popular, but like right when I got to Jive and Zomba, after I left Roadrunner, we were doing publishing deals with Korn, and we did very early, we did publishing deal with Limp Bizkit. And so Limp Bizkit had not hit yet at all. And, we found out about them from the same management company who worked with Korn, and Korn were like the Mac Daddies of fucking nu metal still. And, basically they were telling us about this Limp Bizkit band. And so, the first time I saw Limp Bizkit was the first Warped Tour. So they one of the first things they did is they did Warped Tour because they were getting their management was paying to get them on everything, so everything that was going on, they paid and put them on those shows. So they paid to put them on the first Warped Tour. I guess there was like, what was it, like is there a House of Pain Korn tour or some shit? And then
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
And and I think Limp Bizkit wound up being the opener, and obviously that was arranged for them. So you could see that there was something kind of cool going on. It didn't hit me the same way Korn did, because Korn felt like a metal band to me in a way. Like when you saw them, it felt like you were seeing a metal band.
Mm-hmm.
There was a different aesthetic a little bit, but like ultimately the presentation was this 5-piece band, and it was heavy, 2 guitar players, but Limp Bizkit felt like with the DJ that they were after something kind of more commercial, even though Fred was trying to be like kind of a tough guy, but like people didn't like him, like him, like the people on the Warped Tour, like all kind of hated him and thought he was a dick and, that. So I really had nothing to do with, signing anything sort of nu metal-y. Like one of the early publishing deals I did at Zomba was Mudvayne. I'll tell you that. So, Mudvayne was a band that I saw as like, after Slipknot, they were kind of, to me, the ones, and I thought Dig was just insanely good. And, I liked their whole shtick and everything.
Yeah.
But they were great players, And
musically, they are very, very talented.
I have a really, really good story about the bass player I can tell you, but I will say that they were like Tool level musicians, like they were amazing. And, a lot of people overlooked it because of the shtick, with the makeup and all that stuff. And I think people kind of looked past the fact that they were incredible players.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
So, I signed those guys to a publishing deal and we did very well with them. And one day I get a call from the owner of Zomba, like who I interacted with a little bit, but not too much. And he was very close with Metallica's managers. They did business together on a label that brought Tool into the fold over there, all this stuff. So he said, and this is like not long after Jason Newsted had left Metallica. And they said, Metallica's looking for a new bass player, blah, 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 blah. They want to audition the guy from Mudvayne. And I'm like, interesting. I was like, he's amazing. Like, I don't know if he's their style, but he's amazing. So I could see why. And apparently he was like the top of their list. So,
wow.
So can you talk to Cliff and Peter over at Q Prime about this? They want to discuss it with you. And I'm like, okay. So I called them up and they're like, look, we love him. He's like our number one. We want to have him jam with the guys, blah, blah, blah. We'll fly him out, whatever. So now I'm like, great. We just gave Mudvayne like a shit ton of money, like for a publishing deal. And Metallica wants to pluck the bass player, out of the band. And I'm like, fuck, what do I do? So, but then I'm remembering, listen, the owner of the company just told me to help them get this guy if they want him, So I'm like, okay, it's his money I'm spending, So I'm like, okay, I can't not let him know that Metallica want to talk to him. I have to tell him. But how do I do this around their manager and like all this stuff? Because I can't make a big deal out of this. Like I can't let everybody know about this because I don't know what his band members are going to think about it. I don't know what the manager's going to think about it. Like I'm in a weird place.
Then you get a bad rep if it happens that way.
Right. Because then I'm like, I'm a dick,
Yeah.
So, but I won't be a dick to the guy because he's, going to find out that Metallica wants to try him out. So they were about 3 weeks later, they were coming to town. So I said, okay. They were going to play at Jones Beach. I forgot who they were opening for, but they were playing at Jones Beach, like opening for, they were doing PNC and Jones Beach and all that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to the show and I'll grab him and I'll take a walk and I'll let him know. So I'm like, where is he? Blah, blah, blah. They're like, oh, he's in the back of the bus. I was like, is he with anybody? They're like, no. I'm like, perfect. Back of the bus. I'm like, so, how you doing? We do all the small talk, all the bullshit, how you doing, family, blah, blah. So got to tell you something. And I hope you appreciate why I'd like to speak with you privately about it and blah, blah, blah. And I said, got this call and Metallica is interested in talking to you about being Jason Newsted's replacement. And so he's like, what? I'm like, I shit you not. This is a real thing. This is real, they want to talk to you. I've been asked to put you in touch with Q Prime and they will tell you the rest, but I'm just letting you know. So now his head's spinning, like, especially later, if you watch some kind of monster, what's the first thing they did with Rob Trujillo? They gave him $1 million. So he doesn't know this yet, obviously, but that's what ultimately happened. So he said, let me think about this. Let me think about what I want to do about this and like all the shit. And to his credit, a couple of days later, he called me back and said, I'm not interested.
Wow.
And he just stayed in Mudvayne.
That's very surprising, man.
They kind of made like 1.5 more successful albums, and that was that.
Yeah, 1.5. That's fine.
You know what I mean? Like they did an album and then like, a half a good album. They were trying to be a radio band at that point, kind of, and it was like a little bit different. And that was that. And it was one of the weirdest things I've ever had to do.
So working with Jive was more of a I'm not really familiar. That's more of like a hip hop label.
Yeah, it was. Well, when I was there, they had the hip hop history, with KRS-One and GZ Jazzy Jeff and the Tribe Called Quest and those
Mobb
things.
Deep and stuff, right?
Later, but
later.
Had,
okay,
they had R. Kelly,
Okay.
who was gigantic. And then, you know, the teen pop thing blew up, you know? So that's when I got there is when the Backstreet Boys started happening.
Okay.
And then shortly thereafter, Britney Spears, and shortly thereafter, NSYNC. So I was there through all of that.
Wow.
And then, but at the same time, they signed to the label, they signed Head PE.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But the publishing company, which was Zomba, which was the parent company of Jive, you know, we did all kinds of things. So, you know, it was hip hop, rock, all over the place. So I did like a lot of different deals as publishing deals there. And I signed one band to Jive, which was Bowling for Soup, and they blew up, you know? So It was like a very interesting, I looked at them initially as a publishing thing. And then I wound up bringing it to Jive to the A&R meeting, and we wound up signing them.
Great fucking band too, man.
They're just so much fun. You know what I mean? They're the perfect, like, never took anything seriously. And then very similarly to Dog Eat Dog, just stuff worked out in their favor. Like all the stuff you need to align happened for them. But at the same time, and also similar to Dog Eat Dog, hardest working band and super personable, like would talk to a cabbage if they said that they were a fan, you know, nobody was too small, you know, they would talk to everybody. They'd call your kid and leave the outgoing message on the phone and like, whatever, you know, and, you know, they were just great guys and it just worked. And that was such an incredible place to be. And I was there for 10 years. And I learned so much being there, you know. And I'll tell you this: when I went there to interview for the job, which was at first like an A&R person for the publishing company. So the owner's brilliant. Like he was absolutely brilliant. It was a completely independent company. Great guy, really smart. So what he wanted to know from me when I went in for my interview was, how does a Roadrunner Records do what they did with Dog Eat Dog? Like, how did that happen? Like the whole thing in Europe. It baffled him. Like how Roadrunner signed this band and they became like a pop group, you know, overseas. And so we went through all that stuff, you know, and then he didn't understand that, like, I loved the Tribe Called Quest also, you know. He was like, I thought you were like the rock guy, you know. And I'm like, well, I am, but I like music, you know what I mean? I grew up in Queens, New York. Like,
exactly. Yep.
You know, like hip hop everywhere. There's, you know, there's this, there's that. Later, even dance hall when it was bigger than fucking hip hop in America, you know, for a little while. I was like, I love music. You know, I love aggressive music. I like youth music, you know, just stuff that's like rebellious and whatever. And so that's how I got the job there, you know. But he wanted to know, like, how does Dog Eat Dog happen on Roadrunner? That's the big mystery he wanted.
That's what he was trying to figure out.
He wants all the secrets.
Well, he wanted to know, just like, how did you get that done? Like, how do you sign a band for, you know, barely double digit figures, you know, with zeros after it? And how does that happen? You know? And we went through the whole thing, and like, how did Jam Master Jay produce a song for them? I was like, that was my idea, like, you know, blah, blah, blah. I was like, again, grew up in Queens, Run DMC, like, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like, I went to elementary school with like their little brothers and sisters, you know, like, you know, I heard about them. I didn't know what the hell it was. Like, I saw Shell Toe Adidas Superstars before I ever heard that music, you know what I mean? Like, you saw the culture of it before you ever heard the music, you know?
Speaking of New York, obviously New York is a state in the United States, but I always feel like New York is its own like thing. Like, there's so much stuff and there's so many trends and styles that come out in New York. It just always was always interesting to me, man. Like, you being from there, is that how you feel is like over there too?
Oh, I think so too. I mean, New York is a really, really unique place in the world. I'm not going to say there's nowhere kind of like it, but it really is its own entity. Like the type of people that are here, the energy of it. it's real different, you know, and there's like a competitive thing about New York that's kind of cool. And like, that's, I think, why hip hop thrived here, because hip hop began as a competitive thing. It was like DJ battles and MC battles and like, you know, who could keep the party going longer. And like, that's kind of like what that was, you know? And, you know, while we have like obviously a history of, you know, great rock bands and things, like it's punk rock that really put New York on the map when it comes to rock, you know? You know, Elvis wasn't from here, the Beatles weren't from here, but the Ramones were from here, and everything that came after the Ramones, you know, credits the Ramones, you know, and then you have the, you know, the Dead Boys, and you have, you know, whether Talking Heads and Blondie and Patti Smith, and that whole movement that happened in like the mid 70s here, it's still birthing children, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of amazing. And like, you know, hip hop is the hip hop you knew, like from that time, has actually come and gone. Like that stuff's not even popular. Like kids don't like that style, you know, and they like this other shit. But what was cool is that New York rubbed off on places like Philly, you know, and Jersey's a natural, but like Philly had its own thing too, right? And if you go a little further south, when you go into DC, and DC had go-go, which like was something that wasn't happening everywhere, you know? It had its own thing, but it picked up on what was going on in New York, and Philly picked up on what was going on in New York. And, you know, so Boston picked up on what was going on in New York, but Boston had great rock bands themselves, you know, and like, you know, you think of Aerosmith and you think of stuff like that. So, you know, everybody had its own little thing, but like entire genres of music, like when you think that punk and hip hop were both born here, you know, that's kind of amazing.
It is, man. It's like you cross that bridge and it's just like a whole new world.
It's a monster in and of itself. And even the pop radio stuff, how much of it that gets national coverage that blows up starts on Q102?
Well, but here's the thing though. What's interesting is that it blows up from here, you know, like the Z100 kind of stuff. Like it blows up here, but the way radio works, like they're all in these like these chains, you know, so like some chain will have like 40, 50 radio stations. So like Bowling for Soup blowing up on pop radio in America, it started on a station in Indiana that was in the same chain as Z100. And Z100 didn't want to be the first station to play it, because if it tanked, then it looks like they couldn't get it done, right? So they let it start on some of their littler market stations, like this one in Indiana, and it went to #1 in like a day, right, in Indiana. So after a couple of weeks of it doing really, really well there, it took that for Z100, for instance, to say, okay, we'll fuck with it now. Because how many songs does Z100 play an hour? 11? You know, it's like they don't play many songs, you know? It's a lot of advertising. It's a lot of contests. It's, you know, little guest spots and shit, you know, an artist talking about themselves, like, you know, on the air. They don't play that many songs. You know, so they started Bowling for was blowing up in Indiana. They started like in the middle of the night on Z100. They play at 4 a.m. You know, when, you know, whoever's waking up at 4 a.m. to go to work can hear it.
Yeah.
You know, but I learned a ton, like as far as how the real mainstream music business works. That was an unbelievable lesson. Like you could not go to school for that. You had to be in it and see everybody around you doing their jobs. It was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's not something somebody can just tell you and you just go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they can tell you, but then it just sounds like rumors, because it's sort of so nuts that, you know, you're like, yeah, that's bullshit. Or, you know, you've heard all the like stories and like, you know, cocaine for airplay and, you know, I'll buy your daughter a car. Like that shit happened, you know, like it may not have been that blatant, but that kind of stuff happened.
Yeah. So I know it's getting late. You have time for a couple more?
Yeah.
All right. So it's Jay, I know I interrupted you. Did you want to say something?
No. Keep going.
Okay. So I wanted to, I don't think I asked you this last time, but like, the ability to stream like digitally now, like Spotify, Apple Music, and all that stuff. Do you think that's like transformed the music scene? And would that be something like nowadays you would look into, like signing a band? Like, would you look at their streaming numbers nowadays and be like, you know what, I think I could work with this band?
Well, I mean, I just think you always have to remember you have to look at a lot of different things. Like
Okay.
you can't just look at one thing, right?
Okay.
There's no way. And you can't just look at like analytics and nothing else, because it doesn't mean anything. It means that, you know, whatever audience is there, you have to know how they earned that audience, and did they earn that audience, you know, or did they pay for it? Because you could do that too.
Yeah, good point.
But in the same way, like we were talking about VOD, it's like when I went to see 1,700 people go berserk for them, it was better than going to see 200 people going to berserk for them. But yes, there was something about the fact that there were that many people, but it wasn't just, they weren't just in the room. They were sucked in. They were completely into this band. They knew all the words. They would, if Tim Williams said, go fucking blow up the gas station down the street, everybody would have gone running. You know what I mean? It was that kind of thing, you know? So just because you have those numbers, you have to look at like, is that passion level there? Like, do these people, are these people ready to spend money on them for a couple of years, you know, and invest in them and make them part of their life? And like, is that going to happen? Like, that's what I need to know. So, you know, it's like now, like, you know, baseball playoffs are going on, and I love baseball. I watch all the time. And, you know, sabermetrics is obviously taken over baseball in such a huge way, but it's got to be a combo of sabermetrics and like the gut instinct of a smart manager when you're making calls, especially in the playoffs where like you're playing for your life. Like there may not be any more season for you tomorrow. So you have to be smart. And, you know, sometimes they let the computers just make the decisions for them. And sometimes that bites you in the ass because there's always going to be a human variable there somewhere that you're going to overlook if you're going to go straight analytics. And you certainly can't do that with music. I mean, music is such an emotional connection, you know, between an artist and a fan. And you know, no like numbers is going to tell you the whole story.
Yeah, that's what I figured, because I totally forgot that you can buy numbers nowadays, which, you know,
click farms. And
it's crazy, man. Like it's
just
just
to get signed, you know, because they're like, look at our numbers, you know, and it's like, okay, I see your numbers, but like, you know, I need to know what those numbers mean. Like of those X amount of people, like how many of those people really give a shit about you?
Exactly. Like, I wonder how many bands get signed from numbers wise, and then they just flop on the label.
It happens all the time. I mean,
yeah.
And, you know, at the end of the day, one of the beautiful lessons that I got from Jive and Zamba was that there's no such thing as an almost hit, right? There's no almost hit. There's no B plus. There's no A minus. Like, it's a hit or it's not a hit. So they were in the hit making business. That's what Jive did. So when they're picking singles for, you know, Justin Timberlake or Britney Spears or NSYNC or whatever, it's like when you're going to play that game, like you're going to do the radio thing and, you know, invest all that money in that kind of marketing and promotion, you have got to be so fucking on the money about the song you pick to go there with. And there are so many chefs sometimes, and everybody wants a piece. And the beauty with Bowling for Soup is that nobody cared. Like, so when I was at Jive, people were like, oh, the band with the fat guy. You know what I mean? Like, they, you know what I mean? Like, that's all they were there. They were like the stupid band from Texas with the fat guy. And I love that nobody cared, because we just felt like we were tuned in and we knew what songs could work. We knew when they didn't have the right song. We knew that we had this machine ready to go if we delivered the right material. And so I appreciated that challenge more than trying to pick a band out of thin air that I think, you know, is going to be successful. like, I know what this has to be, you know? And the first time I heard, Girl All the Bad Guys Want by Bowling for Soup, when I went to the studio and I heard their version unmixed, that was the first time I ever had the like, holy fucking shit, they did it. They actually just nailed it. And they'd never nailed it before. They came close, but they never nailed it. Now I know what a hit sounds like. This is the first time ever. And sure enough, 500,000 records, Grammy, nomination, like all the shit. And it was just like, you just know. And there is no almost hit, It's like, if it's an A-, then that's not it.
So what effect does the Billboard charts have on like a band that you represent, like with touring wise, and does it get them bigger tours and stuff like that?
It does, because it just, whether it should or doesn't, it legitimizes them to the music business, right? Okay. So it makes everybody outside the company and outside their immediate circle go, oh, there's obviously something going on with that band, Same thing with radio charts, so it's if they're doing well in a market. So you got to look at it market by market, right? So if it's in Philly and back in the day, okay, they're top 5 on WYSP and, they're selling in, X amount of copies a week in this chain and whatever, when you compare it to all the other records that are out there that are big, you can sort of get an idea that there's something happening, they're competing with the 10, 20 biggest records in our market, And so you can even start to estimate, well, that means they can probably play, they can play the Trocadero instead of playing, what was that place? JC Dobbs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Like Kill Time and shit.
Right. Like they can play, instead of playing the 250 capacity place, they could play the 1,000 capacity place.
Yeah. Okay.
And so it all starts to come together, And if they mean tickets there, it also helps their ability to be a support act, because they're like, well, they're probably worth 600 or 700 tickets. So it takes the headlining band show from 1,000 to maybe 1,700, 1,800 in another place, Theater of the Living Arts, or maybe we play somewhere bigger, or maybe it's 2 nights. All that shit figures in.
Do you think a lot of labels look at social media numbers as well? Like, oh, they have 10,000 Facebook likes. Do you think
Absolutely.
Like people
now they totally do?
Okay.
Now they totally do, because you can't. You used to be able to just go to a show and just sort of know this shit,
Right.
And just, you could see the reaction. You could see the activity at the merch booth, after the show, and like kids clamoring for shirts. And then you go to the next show of another band a week later, and everybody's wearing that band's shirt. And like, you feel like the actual buzz and the groundswell going, Yeah. But again, it's like, you can fake social media numbers. You can fake all that shit. So again, you can tell when people are really interacting versus just like the numbers, because they could be just sort of dead numbers.
Yeah. It's just crazy, because I feel like a lot of bands are like, oh, I don't need an Instagram. It's like, no, you do, man, because if you want to get out there,
the bigger labels definitely use that stuff, and they use it now more than ever.
Yeah, it's like, what's the point of not doing it? Like, you have the possibility of being seen by a certain amount of people. Why would you not do it?
Well, it's
just crazy.
It's part of building a fan base. Like, so, that's the whole point. It's like the band that goes on tour and gathers fans, like one at a time as they play shows, the retention rate is much higher. You're going to keep those fans. And so, you want for them to have a home base or multiple home bases, for them to be able to go, whether it's on a daily basis or every few days or every week, and see what's going on. Like that, they just put out a new song, or they, did an acoustic set and it's on YouTube and I can listen to it, or whatever it is, and you want to interact, and you want to keep all that stuff, all that activity present, so that people will, stay in touch with your band and your music.
Definitely. I mean, just for me and Jay's podcast now, I mean, Instagram every day, 2 new followers, then an hour later, 2 more. It's like Facebook, you get nothing. But it's like, I just never understand why people don't utilize what's free and what's
it's free.
Here's what's funny.
I mean?
Here's what's funny. I have a 12-year-old daughter, right? And so sometime last year, she started to become pretty aware of social media, so like Snapchat kind of came first, and there was Musical.ly, which turned into TikTok, and then, for her age group, Instagram actually started to pop up. And I was like, what about Facebook? And she said to me, it was the fucking greatest. Like, without missing a beat, she goes, kids my age don't use Facebook.
It's for old people. It's for old people. It's funny as that is to say, right?
It is.
That's when that got hammered home. I was just like, holy shit. Like I didn't really see it that way, but it's true. And now I really see it that way because that's how kids her age see it.
Yep.
Like that's for old people.
That's funny, man. So, all right. So I have one more big thing and then we can get the hell out of here unless Jay has something. What effect do you think this is COVID going to have on live shows, and how long do you think this is going to be a breaker of just like bands breaking up and, venues going down and stuff? Because I feel like it's getting really bad, man.
Well, it's bad, and I fear that we're not getting out of this very soon.
Yeah.
I think live music is very, very, very far down the priority list.
Yep.
And even though it involves bar business and like all that stuff, I don't see indoor venues of a few hundred to maybe a couple of thousand opening their doors for proper business anytime soon. I'm starting to wonder if it will even be in 2021.
Me as well, man. And I feel like the big thing, the big thing now for people is stuff like, podcasts and radio shows and stuff like that. I feel like that's going to be the new future.
Well, it's definitely happening. I think it's an amazing time for podcasts, especially good ones. But I love like niche podcasts that talk about subjects that only, couple people give a shit about. I love that. I like, I'm a big Howard Stern guy. And like, for me, the beauty of him is his interviewing skills and the ability to get shit out of people that they don't even want to talk about. Yeah. And like, they went into it like, I don't want to talk about this, and can't stop talking about it because he makes them so fucking comfortable that, they can't stop. So I love that kind of stuff. And like I love when people like ask Howard Stern why he doesn't do a podcast. He's like, what the fuck do you think my show is?
Exactly.
Yeah, like, it's all it is.
Yeah, like, it is. How many people have Sirius XM subscriptions? A lot more than your podcast.
Yeah. Just to hear him exclusively.
Yeah.
Largely. They did I saw a thing in the paper because, he's renegotiating right now. And they talked about how many people, like the minute he said, the minute he would announce, I'm not saying this is happening, but the minute he would announce that he's leaving, 3 million people would cancel the subscriptions right there.
Absolutely.
Yep.
No question that would happen.
The day of, like the first day he's not there, they will no longer have Sirius XM.
Mm-hmm. To me, Howard is serious.
Yeah. Well, that's how
he is.
I got it. I actually really like it now, but he's the reason I got it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. A lot of people tell that same story. They got it because they're Howard Stern fans.
I can honestly say I don't know if I'd get rid of it so fast if he left, because I kind of like it now, but I don't know if it's worth, what they charge for it the same way. But there's always a deal on Sirius. Like,
all you have to do is call up and complain, and they knock your bill down. That's all you have to do.
But even if you don't complain, like there's some promo that comes out where you can get like $5 a month for the next 6 months, and then you somehow renew it, and like that's after the 6 months, that's when you complain and you go, like my radio glitched out yesterday and it was the last day and I was really enjoying it and it ruined my experience. That's 6 more months for $4.87.
Yeah. Plus tax. Okay. Yeah. So how much do you think I'm going to add this in, like streaming wise, I feel like a lot of people complain about the money they get paid for that. And I feel like it's a good complaint because they don't get shit, man. Like, what is it? Like 0.0017? It's
something insulting.
It is insulting. I was going to say insulting was the word I was going to use. And the thing about streaming is it goes back to like when the file sharing shit was kicking off with like Napster. What happened was especially the big labels, the major labels. So that started to happen. And what that ultimately was a chunk of the audience that would buy music and really like was engaged in music said, I don't want to be at the mercy of these labels anymore, telling me when I can have a record and how much I have to pay for it and what formats it's available in and like all this shit. I just want what I want and I want it when I want it, you know, and that's it. So that's when file sharing started coming around, and that's when all the catalog, you know, you can get like every record you wanted, like, and just have a file of it in your computer or in some device, and that's it. And, you know, you didn't even pay for it, which, you know, that's a different thing, because I do believe you should pay for music. But the industry panicked. So instead of saying there's this Napster thing and people are stealing music, and the way they framed it was so ugly, it was like people were killing people, you know, that they just started suing everybody, you know, instead of saying, well, if X percentage of the record buying audience is doing this, maybe it's going to grow and there's going to be more people doing this, but maybe we should be investigating this and figure out how to own that part of the business too and be smart about it. So again, then you wind up like Metallica suing Napster, you know, suing everybody with Napster and like all this shit. And it just got really silly. Like it didn't solve anything. And
it actually made it worse, Howie. I would argue it made it worse.
No, it was kind of like putting you know, like a parental advisory sticker on a record. It just made people want it, you know? And so basically, and now it's like on the news, right? So everybody knows there's a Napster. You know, there was like a few thousand people who knew what it was. Now it's on the 6 o'clock news. So, you know, they screwed up with that. And so what they did to counter that when Apple came along with iTunes and like all that stuff is they cut really terrible licensing deals for little money for the artist and a lot of money for the label, per song, per album, all of that. So what happened is the artists were getting paid dirt, and then they would find out that their label that's supposed to be on their side, like cut a deal with Apple that was shit and for 10 years. So they were going to get paid poorly for a decade. And, you know, and all of the music's going to be the same price. It's all going to be 99 cents a song, right? So I remember when I went to Warner's, which was the worst professional experience of my life. I went to Warner Music for a little while. But the first music conference I went to was very interesting because these are the kinds of things that were issues at the time. So like around 2005, right? 2005, 2007. And so Leor Cohen, who was the president of the company at the time, used to be the president of Def Jam, like all that shit. He's talking about like, you know, licensing and Apple and iTunes and all this stuff and how it's weird that all the music costs the same, you know, 99 cents. So he goes, I had a meeting with Jimmy Page because they were trying to get Led Zeppelin to put their catalog on iTunes. And he really Jimmy Page didn't know shit about like iPods or anything. He goes, how does this work? So Leor explains the whole thing to him. And he goes, so what you're telling me is that my song, Stairway to Heaven, is the same price as the total disposable bullshit pop song that's going to last for 6 months and disappear off the planet. You're telling me that that's how this works. And he's like, that's how this works. And he goes, you've got to be fucking kidding me. And that year, if you remember, there was a while when it started that some songs were $1.29 and some were 99 cents.
Yep.
That was partially a result of that conversation, right? Wow. So it was, everybody was trying to figure out what the fuck do you do, right? So, and then this is even like Spotify was kind of on the map, but not yet. It certainly wasn't in America yet. And that was a whole other thing where like, you don't have to buy anything. You could buy a subscription to Spotify or not. And, you know, it's per stream, and then now streams are going to count towards sales and Billboard, and the Billboard charts are going to be affected by how many streams on Spotify and all of these services there are, and Pandora. And it just got so stupid, and they still haven't figured out the value of all this, because they cut these terrible deals. So they feel like, well, if we double the rate or triple the rate, which is really what they should be doing, it's like, who triples like the rate we're at, after in 10 years? It's like they're operating by these dumb old rules, and they can't modernize it. Like, they can't figure out, because at the end of the day, they're still giant corporations, and it's about margin, and it's about all of that stuff. It's not about music or making it better for the music consumer or any of that stuff. They don't even care.
No, it's about the, and I would actually argue, I wouldn't argue. I would say that iTunes and the deal that Steve Jobs cut with all the record labels, right? There was a book that they wrote about the rise of the iPod, where he got them all. He got Warner, BMG, he got them all in a room, and he said, all your music's going in this thing. Everybody's getting $1 a song, and that's it. And that actually, I think that led to the panic at the movie studios, which is why our streaming services now are so balkanized.
Well, all that's
why we have Hulu, Netflix, this, that, so on, another, because they all want to control it, because they saw what Steve Jobs did, where he bent them over a barrel, and he was the only game in town. He basically, to your point, guaranteed.
And they had to follow.
Yeah.
They had to follow.
Yeah.
And in some cases, these places are all owned by the same people. So you have Universal. Like, does the Universal president of film know the Universal president of music? Not really, but they're the same company. Sony, same company. And if you look at all these other companies, they're all owned by somebody who's owned by them. And it's all the same thing. It's not like everybody thinks there's all these different companies out there. It's like, no, it's like, and that's why, like, Netflix has been a little bit revolutionary, because they went into the big studio game and competed immediately, and and had sort of a more reasonable subscription rate, and like the way they did things. I mean, listen, when it started, they fucking delivered a goddamn movie to your house.
Yeah. It was DVDs in the mail.
Send them back. Yeah, it's
you know what I mean? It's like, but then they're like, all right, well, like at the supermarket, you could just drop it off in this box,
Yeah. All right, one more thing. I promise you that's it.
Yeah.
So the whole live stream stuff for bands now, do you think that'll be the future if COVID continues to just decimate everything?
Well, listen, I'm glad it's there just to like keep a toe in the water, but it's nothing like going to see live music.
No.
It's not a replacement. There's no way to compare it. It's not quite the same as like, watching a music video, but it's closer to that than it is to seeing an actual show, because there's nothing to replace like being in a room with, hopefully a bunch of like-minded people who are going to appreciate the same thing together with you. There's like this power in that, like there's this unbelievable feeling that comes with that experience. And, that's how I love music the way that I do. Like that, it's funny because like hardcore and metal, it's like such a live thing. Like there's so many great bands who made shit albums, and, you realize how great they are when you just go see them, So I've always, the live experience has always come first for me. And even Bowling for Soup, like we knew that they were kind of, like a radio band, whatever. But if they weren't good live, when I went to Denton, Texas to see them, if they weren't good, you don't sign them, because at the end of the day, like even if you're on Z100, they're going to ask you to play one of their shows or events or something. And it's like, you got to kill, like you got to be able to throw down. And so even pop groups, like you got to be able to perform and
you got to
people and deliver that feeling, So again, I appreciate the live stream thing. I really do. But it's just not a replacement, like we have to get back to it.
Eventually. Yeah. And I hope it does, man. Cause like Jay says all the time, I'm fucking itching, man. I need something.
We're gonna get back to it. It's just gonna take time. It's like, it's funny. Like people used to shit all over comparing COVID to the flu, like at the beginning, but in a sense, it kind of is, because at the end of the day, we've been living with the flu our entire lives, and whether you're pro-vaccination, anti-vax, it doesn't matter. There's a vaccination for it, and it keeps people from dying of the flu. It's not to keep you from getting the flu. It's to keep you from dying from the flu.
Yep.
So if we can get a vaccine for COVID and like all this shit, it'll be a lot better, and we can coexist with it just like we do the flu, or we can eradicate it like we've done with lots of other diseases that came before it. Yeah. And it's going to, whatever it's going to be, it just isn't going to be tomorrow. And and it ain't going to be before any election and, and whatever. So basically it'll be fine. I just don't know when that's going to be. But I think the focus has to shift to how do we live with this thing as opposed to how do we get rid of it.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, shit, I fucking had it. So it's real.
I just tested positive for antibodies.
Oh, did you?
And I was never sick.
Yeah, dude, I had a headache and a fucking loss of taste. My girlfriend got killed with it. Well, not killed, but you know what I mean? She got really bad.
I had nothing, no symptoms, none of the classic symptoms you keep hearing about.
Yeah.
And I went for a checkup, and I was like, well, we're doing the blood test, so you might as well give it to me. So, and I've never had a COVID test because I didn't feel any reason to have one. We were super, super careful, like when the early days, gloves, masks, wiping down groceries, the whole thing. And a week ago, I tested positive for antibodies, and I was like, I can't believe it. And then my wife just went and had her test negative.
Oh, wow. That's crazy, man.
It is wild.
You just never know, like, how severe is it? You just never know.
Well, it's severe because it's a fucking mystery.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the biggest problem is that no two people get it the same way.
You never know what you're going to get. Yeah.
Yeah, because her kid didn't get it at all, and he was here with us the whole time.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
It's crazy. It's crazy, man.
Yeah, I had not a symptom, and I get the test back, and it's positive. I'm like, you got to be kidding. I don't even know how that's possible.
Yeah, at the same time, it's like, I'm kind of happy I got it, because if it's true that you can only get
feel it.
I'm kind of happy, but
well,
at the same time,
I'll tell you what I found out with the antibodies, at least what my doctors told me, and then what I've heard other people have gotten, is that they're not sure if like you're immune now, because they don't know how long it stays in your body. And again, everybody's different. So that's what they're finding out too, that like you and I now obviously both seem to have had it. Right. Yep. And like, no idea. Like my antibodies could be done. You can have them for 2 years. Who knows?
Exactly.
It's idea.
It's wild, man. So listen, dude, thank you so fucking much for the time. This was so much, absolutely great conversation.
Pleasure. It's fun, man.
Listen, tell everybody where they can find, you know what? Tell everyone what books you've done and where they can find them and all that stuff, because they're a good read and people should know about them. And let's get that out there.
You wouldn't know, Tim, about the Pete and Lou book, so whatever.
I know it's going to be good though.
Okay, thank you. So most recent has been The Blood and the Sweat, which is the story of Pete and Lou from Sick of It All, the Kohler brothers. All of it is on, Amazon, obviously. So there's that. I did a book with HR from Bad Brains. Hip Hop Alphabet 2, the ABCs of Metallica, the Metallica Alphabet book.
Which I bought my girlfriend's son that book. He loves it.
You told me, yeah.
Yeah,
we did really well with that. That's been really fun. And then the 20th anniversary Warped Tour book, Misfit Summer Camp, and then
got that one up there. Yeah.
Oh, very nice. And then Merciless Book of Metal List was the first one. And, unfortunately COVID is going to screw up my streak of a book a year. So, we'll see, but, all available on Amazon. If you're into, shopping indie, a lot of record stores who carry books have the books. So, I know if I could tell you specifically in Philly, but I know a bunch of the Philly bookstores definitely have it. Barnes & Noble has the books. Generation Records in New York, Revelation Records website carries a lot of the stuff. Discord has the HR book, so if you look around, you can find it. And, as much as I hate to say it, Amazon's kind of the easiest and it's always the cheapest.
Yeah. But, I mean, I'm not going to lie. That's where I got the Metallica book. So
yeah, it's like, they discount everything. They still ship in a reasonably quick time.
Absolutely.
And you can find it. And then, that's what I've been doing. And I got a couple of tricks up my sleeve and working on those. So, I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Awesome.
Dude, like I said, thank you so much. And we'll talk in the future again, man, because this was great.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm ready for round 3. Name like a new podcast so I could do that one too.
Yeah. And you know what? Before you go, are you doing Merciless Radio anytime soon?
Well, I mean, I'm assuming once COVID is out of our lives, we would love to do it again.
Okay.
It's funny, like a few people like have asked me recently about finding old episodes, and I sent a few links out. And I listened to a couple of things. Like recently, I re-listened to the Todd Youth episode that we did, and that was just so much fun. And it was the anniversary of his passing, you know. So I re-listened, I reposted it and stuff, and it was just I could hear how much fun I was having doing it with Bill, and so. You know, we look forward to doing it again. Bill's been prolific as fuck, like making music right now.
Yeah, he's a monster,
just like
man.
Rolling music out, like the whole COVID shit, like, you know, the thing he did with Nems, and now a new solo album, and
oh my God, yeah,
Gorilla, you know, Cannibal Hulk, and like it's amazing. Like he's super productive.
Yeah, because Jimmy was telling me, like, he's like, you should probably talk to Howie about, like, your metal show, because, like, he got, like, a cease and desist from SoundCloud. And I was like, shit, man, I should probably watch
Oh, yeah. Like, we found out the hard way. But, like, we haven't had, like, a ton of problems. We had one problem, and it was on SoundCloud, and thank you, Megadeth.
Oh, okay. Well, luckily I don't play them, so.
Good. Neither will we ever again. And so that was the only time we had a problem. So then we switched to Mixcloud.
Okay.
Mixcloud pays royalties for music.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Good to know.
SoundCloud was more supposed to be like a talking format, and Mixcloud is more of a DJ format.
Okay. Good to know.
So they pay the ASCAP and BMI and CSAC royalties.
Oh, okay. Good.
You don't get screwed.
Well, listen, dude. It's fucking 2.5 hours almost. So we appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Howie. Much appreciated, man.
What yappers we are.
Yeah, we could probably go for like 2 more, but
I have a feeling we probably could. But
yeah, we probably could, man.
We'll
but dude, listen, man.
But
Dude.
Thank you too, and it was fun to talk. And
absolutely, man.
Our pleasure. Thank you again, Howie.
All right,
yeah, dude, take care, buddy, man.
You too.
All right.